Two men, one war, and a rivalry that shaped how victory was fought. They were allies on paper, fighting the same enemy, serving the same cause, moving toward the same end. But beneath the surface, George S. Patton and Bernard Montgomery were locked in a quiet contest that never truly paused. It was not just about territory or timing. It was about philosophy, ego, reputation, and the question every commander asks: whose way wins wars? Patton believed war was movement. Strike fast, exploit weakness, never let the enemy breathe. To him, momentum was sacred. Hesitation was defeat waiting to happen. He pushed armies forward until supply lines screamed and maps stopped making sense. Speed, aggression, and shock were his tools, and he wielded them with absolute conviction. Montgomery believed war was control, prepare thoroughly. Remove uncertainty, win only when victory was assured. He rejected haste. He built battles deliberately, layer by layer, refusing to advance until conditions favored success. To Montgomery, discipline and preparation saved lives, and wars were won by denying the enemy opportunity, not chasing it. These two men were destined to collide. They first crossed paths in North Africa, where success was fragile and morale mattered as much as firepower. Montgomery's victory at El Alamein restored confidence to the Allied cause and cemented his belief that careful preparation was the path to triumph. Patton watched closely, absorbing the lesson but never accepting the method. In Sicily, the rivalry sharpened. What was meant to be a coordinated campaign became an unspoken race. Patton drove his forces hard across the island, capturing cities and ports with relentless energy. Montgomery advanced methodically, absorbing resistance and shaping the battlefield. Each measured success against the other, not just against the enemy. Neither admitted it openly. Both felt it constantly. By the time the Allies landed in Normandy, the rivalry had become institutional. Montgomery held overall command of the ground battle. Patton commanded one of the most aggressive field armies in Europe. Their differences were no longer personal quirks. They were competing visions of how the war in the West should be fought. In Normandy's hedgerows, Montgomery fixed German armor in place, grinding forward under pressure. Patton broke out, surged across France, and turned open ground into opportunity. Each success reinforced belief. Each setback deepened disagreement. To Patton, Montgomery was too slow. To Montgomery, Patton was too reckless. And yet, the war required both. Without Montgomery's pressure, German forces might have redeployed. Without Patton's speed, breakthroughs might have stalled. Their rivalry was not just conflict. It was tension that shaped decisions, priorities, and outcomes at the highest levels of Allied command. Even as victory approached, the rivalry never faded. Credit mattered. Legacy mattered. History mattered. Both men wanted to be remembered, not just as participants, but as architects of victory. And history, as always, would judge them differently, sometimes unfairly, sometimes incompletely. The story of Patton versus Montgomery is not about who was right. It is about how wars are actually won, by competing ideas, by clashing personalities, by commanders whose strengths cover each other's weaknesses, often without intending to. It reminds us that victory is rarely clean, rarely unified, and almost never free of conflict among those trying to achieve it. Tonight, we return to that rivalry, to the maps and meetings, to the advances and arguments, to two commanders whose competition helped shape the defeat of Nazi Germany. This is the complete history of Patton versus Montgomery, a rivalry fought behind the lines, but felt across an entire continent. Before we continue, I want to pause for a moment and hear from you. Where in the world are you tuning in from right now? And what time is it for you there? Is this part of a late-night wind-down, a quiet morning listen, or something you've saved for a rare moment of calm? And if these long, thoughtful journeys into history help you slow down, reflect, or see the past with clearer perspective, I hope you'll consider subscribing. Every subscription helps keep this space alive and growing. Settle in. This is Patton versus Montgomery. June 8th, 1909. West Point, New York. The mathematics examination room sits silent except for the scratch of pencils on paper and the occasional cough of a nervous cadet. In the third row, A tall young man with piercing blue eyes stares at the equations before him as though they are written in a foreign language. George Smith Patton Jr., descendant of Revolutionary War heroes and Civil War generals, is failing. The numbers swim before his eyes, refusing to arrange themselves into coherent patterns. Around him, other cadets work methodically through problems that might as well be hieroglyphics to the 23-year-old Californian. When the proctor calls time, Patton knows what the results will show before the grades are posted. He will repeat his first year at the United States Military Academy, a humiliation that burns deeper because everyone expects greatness from him. Across the Atlantic Ocean, a very different young man faces very different challenges, but the shame cuts just as deep. Bernard Law Montgomery, son of a bishop and product of the rigid British class system, has spent his childhood learning that emotion is weakness, and that advancement comes through methodical excellence. His mother, Maud, shows him less affection than she does the parish dogs. When young Bernard seeks approval, she offers only criticism. When he achieves something noteworthy, she reminds him of his inadequacies. This emotional desert shapes him into something hard and calculating, a boy who learns to find validation, not in love, but in being unquestionably, demonstrably correct. He will carry this need into adulthood, into war, and eventually into a rivalry that will help define the Second World War. These two boys, growing up 7,000 miles apart, share almost nothing in common except ambition and an unusual capacity for warfare. Patton comes from wealth that most Americans can barely imagine. His family owns vast estates in California, holds railroad fortunes, and traces its lineage back to George Washington's staff officers. He grows up riding horses, reading Homer in the original Greek after memorizing it first, because he cannot decipher the written words, and dreaming of battlefield glory in an age when such dreams seem antiquated. He is dyslexic before anyone knows what dyslexia is, unable to read until age 12, compensating with a photographic memory and an almost obsessive study of military history. His childhood heroes are Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, and Napoleon Bonaparte. He believes, with strange certainty, that he has lived previous lives as a warrior. This is not metaphor to young George Patton. This is literal truth. Montgomery's childhood could not be more different. Born in 1887, third of 9 children, he grows up in Tasmania, where his father serves as Anglican bishop, then moves to England, where his mother's coldness becomes the defining feature of his youth. He learns early that survival means self-sufficiency. He learns that showing need invites disappointment. He learns that the world respects precision, discipline, and the ability to impose order on chaos. Where Patton reads romantic military histories and dreams of cavalry charges, young Montgomery studies his lessons with grinding determination, excels through sheer force of will, and develops a personality that peers find insufferable. He has no close friends. He needs none. The world is a problem set, and he will solve it through superior preparation. The Great War finds them both, and it teaches them opposite lessons. In August 1914, Lieutenant Bernard Montgomery deploys to France with the Royal Warwickshire Regiment as a platoon commander. Within weeks, he experiences the industrialized slaughter that will define World War I. At Le Cateau, he watches his battalion commander die in the opening exchanges. At First Ypres in October, he leads his platoon in an assault and takes a German bullet through his right lung. The shot should kill him. He lies in no man's land, drowning in his own blood, certain he will die. A soldier tries to rescue him and is shot dead across Montgomery's body. Another soldier finally drags him to safety. He survives by millimeters. The experience could have made him reckless, convinced of his own invulnerability. Instead, it makes him cautious. He emerges from the hospital convinced that careful planning and overwhelming preparation are the only acceptable approaches to battle. Soldiers die when commanders are careless. Patton's war begins later, but burns just as intensely. The United States enters the conflict in April 1917, and Captain George Patton volunteers immediately for the newly formed Tank Corps. He has finally found his destiny. Tanks are controversial, experimental, frequently break down, and promise to revolutionize warfare. Patton sees them as the modern equivalent of medieval knights, armored, mobile, devastating. He travels to France, studies British and French tank operations, and becomes one of America's first tank officers. On September 26, 1918, during the Meuse-Argonne offensive, he leads American tanks into combat for the first time. The attack begins before dawn. Patton personally directs his tanks forward on foot, refusing to command from safety. German machine gun fire rakes the battlefield. A bullet strikes him in the upper left thigh, possibly nicking his femoral artery. He goes down hard. His men want to evacuate him. He refuses. For nearly an hour, he lies in a shell crater, directing tank movements and infantry coordination while bleeding into the mud. Only when he loses consciousness do his men carry him to an aid station. Both men emerge from the Great War as decorated heroes, but they emerge with fundamentally incompatible military philosophies. Montgomery receives the Distinguished Service Order and becomes convinced that wars are won through meticulous preparation, superior logistics, and the accumulation of overwhelming combat power before engaging the enemy. Never attack until success is certain. Never gamble with soldiers' lives. Accept no unnecessary risks. His approach is mathematical, almost scientific. He sees war as an engineering problem, applies sufficient force at the correct point, and victory becomes inevitable. This philosophy makes him many enemies among British officers who view warfare as an art requiring intuition and dash. Montgomery does not care what they think. He knows he is right, and history will prove it. Patton draws the opposite conclusion from his war experience. He becomes convinced that audacity, speed, and aggressive leadership are warfare's essential elements. Never give the enemy time to prepare. Never slow down. Attack, exploit, pursue without pause. He believes that tanks represent the rebirth of cavalry warfare, that mobility and shock are more valuable than careful preparation. His philosophy is romantic, almost mystical. He sees war as a test of will where boldness overcomes material disadvantage. This makes him controversial in an American army that spends the 1920s and 30s dismantling its armored forces and returning to horse cavalry. Patton writes articles about tank warfare that his superiors discourage. He conducts experiments that border on insubordination. He collects ivory-handled revolvers and studies Napoleonic campaigns and writes poetry about ancient warriors. His fellow officers think he is brilliant or insane or both. The 1920s and 30s watch these men develop in parallel isolation, each becoming more convinced of his own correctness, each making enemies within his own military establishment. Montgomery serves in Ireland during the Troubles, in Egypt, in India, earning a reputation as a superb trainer of troops and an impossible colleague. He rewrites training manuals without authorization. He criticizes superior officers in writing. In 1937, his wife Betty dies from an infected insect bite, and what little warmth existed in his personality vanishes. He throws himself into work with even greater intensity. He has no hobbies, no social life, no interest beyond military excellence. His subordinates respect his competence and despise his arrogance. His superiors recognize his brilliance and limit his advancement because he cannot work with others. Patton suffers through an even more frustrating interwar period. After the National Defense Act of 1920 restructures the American military, tanks are stripped from the infantry and assigned to cavalry and infantry branches separately, neither of which wants them. The Tank Corps is dissolved. Patton transfers to the cavalry, spending years at Fort Riley and other posts watching horse cavalry prepare for a type of war that is already obsolete. He is promoted slowly. He is passed over for important commands. In 1940, at age 54, he is still a colonel, while men he considers his inferiors become generals. He writes in his diary with barely contained rage, "It is hell to be old and passé and not believed in." He attends dinner parties in Washington, makes connections, cultivates George Marshall, and waits for the war he knows is coming. When France falls in June 1940 and Britain stands alone, Patton is stuck at Fort Myer, outside Washington, irrelevant and aging. Montgomery, by contrast, commands the 3rd Infantry Division, evacuating from Dunkirk. Earning Churchill's attention through his competent handling of the retreat, the war both men have spent their lives preparing for has finally arrived, and their fortunes could not be more different. September 3rd, 1920. Fort Meade, Maryland. Two officers stand beside an experimental tank in the afternoon heat, arguing about the future of warfare with an intensity that borders on insubordination. Major George Patton and Lieutenant Colonel Dwight Eisenhower have spent months conducting unauthorized tests with tanks that officially no longer exist. The recently passed National Defense Act has eliminated the tank corps, assigning armor to the infantry as support weapons rather than independent strike forces. To these two officers, this represents bureaucratic blindness to military reality. They have watched European armies develop tank forces. They understand that the next war will be won by mobility and firepower combined. So they experiment in secret, running tests on tank speed, coordination with infantry, breakthrough tactics. They write reports that circulate among the few officers who care about such things. Then the orders arrive. Stop the tank experiments, return to traditional duties, cease writing articles advocating for independent armored forces. The message is clear: conform or face court-martial. Eisenhower eventually conforms, recognizing that career survival requires patience. Patton does not conform so much as redirect his energy into acceptable channels. He transfers to the cavalry, that most traditional of arms, but brings with him all his radical ideas about mobile warfare. He spends the 1920s at various cavalry posts, teaching, studying, and quietly maintaining his contacts with the tiny community of armor advocates. In 1922, against direct orders from superiors, he publishes an article in the Cavalry Journal titled "Tanks in Future Wars." The piece argues that the next conflict will be decided by armored formations, moving at speeds the Great War never imagined. His superiors reprimand him. His peers call him a maverick. He does not care. He knows he is right, and someday the army will need men who understand mechanized warfare. Until that day arrives, he endures. Across the Atlantic, Bernard Montgomery faces similar resistance, but from a different direction. Promoted to major after the war, he becomes an instructor at the Staff College Camberley in 1926, where his primary responsibility is teaching infantry tactics to future commanders. He approaches this task with characteristic intensity, rewriting the curriculum to emphasize coordination between infantry, artillery, and the new tanks that Britain is developing. His lectures are brilliant and insufferable. He tells senior officers their methods are obsolete. He publishes articles criticizing established doctrine. In 1929, he completes a comprehensive rewrite of the infantry training manual, incorporating lessons from the Great War and anticipating future mechanized conflicts. The War Office rejects it. Too radical, too critical of current practice. Montgomery files the manuscript away and continues teaching his version anyway. Students leave his courses either inspired by his clarity or infuriated by his arrogance. There is no middle ground with Bernard Montgomery. Both men spend the 1930s in increasingly important posts, preparing armies that largely do not want to be prepared in the ways these officers insist are necessary. Montgomery commands battalions in Egypt and Palestine during the Arab Revolt, then returns to England for brigade and division commands. Everywhere he goes, he fires officers he considers incompetent, implements ruthless training regimens, and makes enemies among the establishment. In 1934, while commanding in India, he lectures at Quetta Staff College on infantry-tank cooperation. His talk is meticulously prepared, full of specific examples, and absolutely certain in its conclusions. Senior officers in the audience bristle at his certainty. Who is this middle-ranking officer to lecture them on warfare? But Montgomery is not lecturing them. He is preparing for the future, and he genuinely does not care if they approve. Patton's 1930s are even more frustrating. He serves at Fort Riley, Fort Clark, and other cavalry posts, watching the Army prepare for the previous war while Europe arms for the next one. In 1932, he receives orders that will haunt him for years. Use cavalry and tanks to disperse the bonus army marchers in Washington. These are veterans of the Great War, demanding promised benefits, camped in sight of the Capitol. Patton leads tanks down Pennsylvania Avenue against American veterans. The operation succeeds. The veterans are dispersed. Patton feels sick about it for the rest of his life. He writes in his diary about the shame of using military force against men he fought beside, but he follows orders because that is what soldiers do. The incident reveals something about Patton that his flamboyant public persona obscures. He is capable of deep moral doubt, even as he projects absolute confidence. In 1937, a personal tragedy transforms Montgomery from merely difficult to nearly impossible to work with. His wife Betty, whom he married in 1927 and who softened his harder edges, dies from septicemia after an insect bite on a beach vacation. She is 41 years old. Montgomery is devastated in ways he cannot articulate and refuses to acknowledge. He throws himself into work with even greater obsession. He has no hobbies, maintains no friendships outside professional necessity, and dedicates every waking hour to military preparation. His son David is sent to boarding school. Montgomery remarries his career. From 1937 forward, he is the most competent and least personable officer in the British Army. His superiors recognize his abilities and dread working with him in equal measure. Both men enter 1939 with reputations as difficult mavericks who happen to be right about many things. When Germany invades Poland in September, Montgomery commands the 3rd Infantry Division of the British Expeditionary Force heading to France. At age 52, he finally has a combat command in a war that everyone knows will not be like the last one. He drills his division relentlessly during the phony war period. While other divisions settle into routine, Montgomery runs exercises, fires incompetent officers, and prepares his men for mobile warfare. His superiors complain that he is exceeding his authority. He ignores them. In May 1940, when Germany strikes through the Ardennes and the phony war explodes into catastrophe, Montgomery's 3rd Division is among the best prepared units in the BEF. During the evacuation to Dunkirk, his division serves as rear guard, conducting a fighting retreat that saves 30,000 men. Winston Churchill notices. Bernard Montgomery's career finally catches fire. Patton, meanwhile, is in purgatory. When war begins in Europe, he is 54 years old, stuck at Fort Myer, outside Washington, with no combat command in sight. He watches newsreels of German panzers racing through Poland and France, vindication of everything he has argued for 2 decades. He writes in his diary with bitter frustration, "It is hell to be old and passé and not believed in." He cultivates George Marshall, now Army Chief of Staff, who remembers Patton from their time together in France during the Great War. He lobbies for any command involving tanks. In July 1940, he finally receives orders, command of 2nd Armored Division at Fort Benning, Georgia. He is 56 years old when he gets his 1st division. Montgomery was given one at age 52. This 4-year difference matters to Patton more than he admits. He is older, running out of time, desperate to prove everything he has believed his entire career. At Fort Benning, Patton unleashes training methods that become legendary and controversial. He believes American soldiers are soft, unprepared for the brutality of modern war. He designs exercises that simulate combat conditions with dangerous realism. Live ammunition is used in training. Casualties occur during peacetime exercises. 90-mile night marches push men to physical breakdown. He fires officers who cannot keep up. He delivers profane speeches about killing that shock civilian visitors and delight his soldiers. They start calling themselves Patton's men with pride. The division transforms from a standard armored unit into something harder, faster, more aggressive. When Pearl Harbor is attacked in December 1941, 2nd Armored Division is among the best-trained formations in the United States Army. Patton has turned frustration and age anxiety into furious preparation. By mid-1942, both men are finally positioned for what they have spent their entire careers preparing for: large-scale command and mobile, mechanized warfare. Montgomery takes command of 8th Army in North Africa in August, facing Erwin Rommel and a demoralized British force that has been beaten repeatedly. Patton receives orders for Operation Torch, the invasion of French North Africa, scheduled for November. They are both in their 50s, both considered difficult, both absolutely convinced of their own military genius. They have never met. They barely know each other exists. Within a year, they will be locked in a rivalry that will influence strategic decisions, affect Allied operations, and outlast both their lives. The war they have been predicting has finally arrived, and it will prove them both right and both wrong in ways neither man can anticipate. June 4th, 1940. Dunkirk beaches, France. Smoke rises from burning ships and vehicles as far as anyone can see. 340,000 British and French soldiers are trying to evacuate across the English Channel, while the German army closes from inland. On the perimeter, holding a defensive line that protects the shrinking beachhead, Major General Bernard Montgomery's 3rd Infantry Division fights a disciplined retreat. Other units have panicked, dissolved under pressure, abandoned equipment. Montgomery's division withdraws in good order, formations intact, covering fire coordinated precisely. German attacks find not chaos, but organized resistance. British artillery responds to German artillery with mathematical accuracy. When the division receives orders to pull back another mile, it pulls back exactly 1 mile and establishes new defensive positions. This is the warfare Montgomery has prepared for his entire career. Careful planning, superior discipline, methodical execution even under catastrophic conditions. His division evacuates last, losing the fewest men per capita of any major formation at Dunkirk. Winston Churchill, watching the disaster unfold, notices who performed well. Montgomery's name goes on a list. 2 years and 4 months later, on an airfield in Georgia, George Patton watches his men load tanks onto transport ships bound for Morocco. It is October 1942, and Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of French North Africa, is finally happening. Patton is 56 years old and about to see combat for the first time since he was shot in France 24 years ago. Everything he has spent his life preparing for will be tested in weeks. He paces the airfield, checking equipment, shouting at subordinates, projecting absolute confidence. Inside, he worries. The invasion plan requires crossing the Atlantic, landing on hostile beaches, fighting forces of uncertain loyalty, and coordinating with untested American units. Patton has trained 2nd Armored Division into a lethal instrument, but training is not combat. He writes in his diary the night before embarking, "I shall do my best. If God is for us, who can be against us?" The mix of bravado and religious fatalism is pure Patton. Absolute confidence in his own abilities, combined with awareness that fate may have other plans. Montgomery's desert education begins in August 1942, when he arrives in Cairo to command 8th Army after a series of British defeats. Erwin Rommel's Africa Corps has pushed British forces back to El Alamein, only 70 miles from Alexandria. Another retreat will lose Egypt and potentially the Middle East. The army Montgomery inherits is demoralized, poorly led, and accustomed to failure. British soldiers call Rommel the Desert Fox, with grudging admiration, and speak of their own commanders with contempt. Montgomery's first act is ruthless. He fires 23 officers in 3 days. Brigade commanders, staff officers, anyone he judges incompetent or defeatist is sacked immediately. The purge shocks the army. Then Montgomery begins rebuilding. He writes a tactical directive that is distributed to every soldier, explaining in clear, simple language what they will do and why they will win. No more retreats, no more complicated plans. Straightforward, overwhelming preparation followed by methodical advance. The army starts to believe again. While Montgomery rebuilds 8th Army, Patton executes the torch landings at Casablanca on November 8th. The operation is chaotic. French forces in Morocco, loyal to Vichy, resist with uncertain intensity. Some units fight fiercely. Others surrender immediately. Naval gunfire supports the landings, but kills American soldiers through friendly fire. Patton lands personally in the second wave, striding up the beach carrying his ivory-handled revolvers, projecting leadership through sheer physical presence. Within 3 days, French resistance collapses through a combination of military pressure and diplomatic negotiation. Patton enters Casablanca, establishes American authority over French Morocco, and begins training his forces for the real fight, advancing east into Tunisia to link with British forces and trap Rommel between 2 armies. The Casablanca landing succeeds because Vichy forces are half-hearted in their resistance. Patton knows this. He has not yet been tested by German forces. That test comes at Kasserine Pass in February 1943. Patton is not directly responsible for the battle. The sector falls under a different American commander. But the defeat reverberates through all American forces in North Africa. German armor smashes through green American units, inflicting nearly 10,000 casualties and humiliating the United States Army in its first major engagement against Wehrmacht forces. Eisenhower, commanding Allied forces in North Africa, needs someone to restore American morale and combat effectiveness. He chooses Patton. On March 6th, Patton arrives at forward headquarters of 2nd Corps, which has just suffered the Kasserine disaster. His first acts are theatrical. He fines soldiers for improper uniform, enforces strict discipline about saluting and military courtesy, gives a profane speech about killing Germans. Morale, which collapsed at Kasserine, begins to recover. Within 2 weeks, Patton launches an offensive at El Gueter, achieving the first significant American victory against German forces. The cost is high, but the proof is established. American forces can fight Germans and win. Montgomery faces his defining moment at El Alamein in late October 1942. Rommel's Africa Corps holds a fortified line running from the Mediterranean coast south into impassable desert. The position is strong. German forces are dug in behind minefields, supported by 88mm anti-tank guns, prepared for British assault. Montgomery spends weeks accumulating overwhelming combat power, 1,029 artillery pieces, 1,000 tanks, hundreds of aircraft. He plans the battle like an engineer solving a problem. British artillery will fire simultaneous barrage at 9:40 p.m. on October 23rd, suppressing German positions. Infantry will advance behind the barrage, clearing paths through minefields. Armor will exploit the openings, engaging German tanks in battles of attrition. Superior numbers will grind down Rommel's forces until they break. There is nothing clever about the plan. It is simply overwhelming force, methodically applied. The battle unfolds exactly as Montgomery predicted, except slower and bloodier. German resistance is fierce. Minefields are deeper than expected. British tanks take heavy casualties. Infantry advances become attritional slogs. But Montgomery does not waver. He has resources Rommel lacks. British artillery fires 1 million shells. RAF aircraft dominate the sky. Fresh divisions rotate into battle as exhausted ones withdraw. By November 4th, after 12 days of grinding combat, Rommel's forces collapse. The Africa Corps retreats westward, having lost 30,000 men, 500 tanks, and the aura of invincibility. El Alamein is Britain's first major land victory of the war. Church bells ring in England for the first time since 1940. Montgomery becomes a national hero overnight. Churchill's assessment is careful but clear. This is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end. But it is, perhaps, the end of the beginning. The parallel desert campaigns establish both generals as proven combat commanders, but through completely different methods. Montgomery wins through meticulous preparation and overwhelming force. Patton wins through aggressive leadership and tactical audacity. Montgomery's casualties are heavy, but acceptable given the strategic result. Patton's casualties are light, but against weaker opposition. Montgomery faces Rommel, the Wehrmacht's most skilled desert commander. Patton faces Italian forces and second-line German units. Both men emerge from North Africa with enhanced reputations, but anyone paying close attention can see that they have succeeded by applying opposite philosophies. This matters because their next campaign will put them on the same battlefield, competing for glory, resources, and strategic priority. Neither man yet knows the other well. That is about to change. By spring 1943, the North African campaign concludes with total Allied victory. German and Italian forces surrender in Tunisia in May, yielding 275,000 prisoners. The Mediterranean is now an Allied lake. The question becomes, where next? Churchill pushes for invading Sicily, arguing it will knock Italy out of the war and threaten Germany's southern flank. The Americans are skeptical, but agree. Planning begins for Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily, scheduled for July. The command structure is announced. General Harold Alexander will command 15th Army Group, coordinating 2 armies. Montgomery's 8th Army will land on southeastern Sicily. Patton's 7th Army will land on south-central Sicily. On paper, they are equals. In practice, Alexander favors Montgomery, giving 8th Army the main effort while relegating Patton's forces to a supporting role protecting Montgomery's flank. This decision plants the seeds for everything that follows. Patton learns of the arrangement and is immediately furious. He has spent his career arguing for aggressive, mobile warfare. Now he is assigned to guard someone else's flank while they conduct the main operation. He lobbies Eisenhower to change the plan. Eisenhower, trying to maintain Allied unity, sides with Alexander. Patton accepts the orders, but privately decides that once the invasion begins, he will interpret them creatively. Montgomery, for his part, barely registers Patton's existence. He is focused on the operational challenge of invading Sicily against German forces that will fight harder than Italians. The British 8th Army has proven itself at El Alamein. This American 7th Army is largely untested. Montgomery assumes Alexander is correct to give 8th Army the primary role. This assumption will prove costly in ways that poison Allied command relationships for the remainder of the war. 2 strong-willed generals, both convinced of their own genius, both certain their approach to warfare is correct, are about to collide on a Mediterranean island while German forces retreat between them. July 10, 1943. 0300 hours. Southeastern Sicily. Paratroopers fall through darkness over Sicily, scattered by high winds across the island. Many miss their drop zones by miles. Some land in the sea and drown. Others land among German positions and are killed before they touch ground. The airborne assault that should have seized key objectives before dawn instead creates chaos. By first light, when Montgomery's 8th Army begins landing on the beaches around Syracuse, the invasion is already improvising. British troops push inland against lighter resistance than expected. Italian coastal divisions surrender quickly. German paratroopers and panzer units, however, fight with the intensity the Allies have learned to expect. Within 24 hours, 8th Army controls its initial objectives and begins advancing north toward Catania, the key city that dominates approaches to Mount Etna and the road to Messina. The plan is straightforward. 8th Army drives north up the coast, while Patton's 7th Army protects the left flank. This is Montgomery's operation. The American role is supporting. Patton lands at Gela, on Sicily's south-central coast, and immediately faces a crisis. German and Italian counterattacks hit the beachhead at dawn on July 11th, threatening to drive American forces back into the sea. Hermann Göring Panzer Division nearly reaches the beach before naval gunfire, and desperate infantry resistance stop them. Patton is everywhere, rallying troops, positioning artillery, radiating the absolute confidence that is his greatest leadership tool. The counterattacks are repulsed. The beachhead holds. But Patton understands the propaganda implications of the crisis. 8th Army pushed inland easily, while 7th Army nearly got pushed back into the Mediterranean. British newspapers will emphasize this. Montgomery will believe it confirms American inferiority. Patton decides, in that moment, that he will not be relegated to supporting role. He will find a way to make 7th Army matter, whether Alexander and Montgomery approve or not. On July 13th, Montgomery's advance stalls at Catania. German forces have established strong defensive positions, using Mount Etna's lava flows as natural fortifications. British attacks make minimal progress at heavy cost. Montgomery sends a message to Alexander. He needs to use Highway 124, which runs inland through Enna toward northern Sicily. This highway is in 7th Army's sector, assigned to American forces for their inland advance. Montgomery argues that since 8th Army is the main effort and is stalled, it makes sense to give him additional routes. Alexander agrees without consulting Patton. On July 13th, Patton receives a memo informing him that his assigned route of advance has been given to British forces. 7th Army should continue in a supporting role, protecting 8th Army's flank. Patton explodes when he reads the order. His staff watches as he paces his headquarters, cursing with a profanity that would shock even soldiers accustomed to rough language. "This is not strategy," he rages. "This is British arrogance." Montgomery is stuck because his methodical approach gives Germans time to prepare defenses. Patton's aggressive tactics could break through before defenses solidify, but he is not being given the chance. He summons his corps commanders and issues new orders. 7th Army will advance rapidly to the west, capturing Palermo and the western half of Sicily, then wheel east toward Messina. These orders directly contradict the supporting role Alexander assigned. Patton knows this. He is deliberately interpreting his mission broadly, betting that success will justify insubordination. He tells his staff, "I'm going to take Palermo, then I'm going to beat Monte to Messina, and there's not a damn thing Alexander can do about it if we're already there." While Montgomery grinds against German defenses around Catania, Patton's 7th Army races westward in what becomes a showcase of American mobile warfare. 3rd Infantry Division and 2nd Armored Division advance in parallel columns, covering more than 100 miles in 4 days. Italian resistance crumbles. American forces capture Palermo on July 22nd, liberating the capital of western Sicily. Patton makes sure war correspondents are present. He holds a press conference before informing Alexander that he has captured a major city. The operation is militarily unnecessary. German forces are in eastern Sicily, not western, but it demonstrates American capability and generates headlines. American newspapers celebrate Patton's dash to Palermo. British newspapers quietly note that 8th Army is still fighting for Catania against actual German resistance. The competition is now explicit. Montgomery finally breaks through at Catania in early August, but the advance remains slow. German forces conduct a masterful fighting retreat, using Sicily's mountainous terrain to maximum advantage. Every ridgeline becomes a defensive position. Every demolished bridge delays the British advance. Montgomery remains methodical, refusing to take risks, accumulating combat power before each push. His approach minimizes casualties but maximizes time. Meanwhile, Patton redirects 7th Army eastward, racing along Sicily's northern coast toward Messina. The two armies are now in an undeclared competition to enter the strategically vital port city first. Both commanders are intensely aware of the race. Montgomery because his prestige is at stake, Patton because his entire career has prepared him for this moment of vindication. On August 17th, American forces enter Messina at 10:30 a.m. Patton personally leads the column into the city, waiting at the city limits in his jeep, watching for British forces. At 1 p.m., British armored cars arrive. Montgomery is not with them. Patton walks to the British vehicles and speaks to the squadron commander. His exact words are debated by historians, but witnesses agree the tone was sarcastically cordial. Some remember him saying, "It took you long enough." Others recall, "I'm glad you could make it." Montgomery arrives later that afternoon, meets with Patton briefly, and the encounter is coldly professional. Neither man congratulates the other. Neither acknowledges the other's achievement. They discuss administrative details about occupation zones and prisoner processing, then separate. The Sicily campaign has lasted 38 days. Over 100,000 German troops escaped across the Strait of Messina to Italy because Allied forces failed to coordinate a proper trap. This strategic failure is obscured by operational success, but historians will later point to Sicily as an example of how personal rivalries can undermine military effectiveness. The statistical comparisons that follow the campaign reveal why both generals can claim success while resenting each other. 7th Army advanced over 200 miles, captured Palermo and Messina, took 90,000 prisoners, and suffered 2,237 killed. 8th Army advanced 90 miles, faced heavier German resistance, took 60,000 prisoners, and suffered 2,721 killed. Patton's forces moved faster and farther. Montgomery's forces engaged stronger enemy formations. Patton can claim speed and dash. Montgomery can claim he faced the real fight, while Americans chased Italians through western Sicily. Both claims have merit. Both men believe their version exclusively. The Sicily campaign establishes the dynamic that will define their relationship for the rest of the war. Parallel operations, competing priorities, and a commanding officer, Harold Alexander, too weak to control either general. Alexander later admits in his memoirs, "I should have controlled them both more firmly." But Alexander is not a firm controller. He is a diplomatic mediator, preferring to avoid confrontation. This works adequately when both subordinates are reasonable. When both subordinates are George Patton and Bernard Montgomery, it guarantees conflict. The race to Messina is only round one. Both men are already thinking about the next campaign, already maneuvering for advantage, already certain that history will vindicate their approach over their rivals. Neither has any idea how badly their rivalry is about to escalate, or how close Patton is to destroying his own career through an act of shocking violence against the men he commands. August 3rd, 1943. 15th Evacuation Hospital, Sicily. General George Patton tours a medical clearing station behind the front lines, part of his practice of visiting wounded soldiers to boost morale. He walks through tents filled with men bearing the visible injuries of combat: shrapnel wounds, broken bones, burns. Then he encounters Private Charles Cool of the 26th Infantry Regiment, sitting on a bed with no visible wounds. Patton asks what is wrong. Cool says his nerves are shot. He cannot take it anymore. The sounds of artillery make him shake uncontrollably. He cannot sleep. He cannot function. Patton's face darkens. He asks Cool how long he has been in combat. 8 weeks, Cool replies. Patton asks if Cool is a coward. Before the private can respond, Patton strikes him across the face with his glove and shouts, "You're a goddamn coward! I won't have cowards in my army." Medical personnel freeze. Patton storms out of the tent, still shouting that Cool should be sent back to the front, that cowards undermine unit morale. The incident takes perhaps 90 seconds. It will nearly destroy Patton's career. 1 week later, on August 10th, Patton visits another evacuation hospital, the 93rd near Sant'Agata. He tours the wounded, offering encouragement and praise. Then he encounters Private Paul Bennett of the 17th Field Artillery. Bennett is sitting with his head in his hands, crying. Patton asks what is wrong. Bennett says he cannot stand the shelling anymore. His unit came under sustained artillery fire for days. He broke. Patton begins trembling with rage. He calls Bennett a coward. He slaps him across the face with his bare hand. Bennett's helmet liner falls off. Patton slaps him again. Then Patton pulls out one of his ivory-handled revolvers, waves it at Bennett, and says he should shoot the private for cowardice. Medical personnel rush forward. Colonel Donald Currier, the hospital commander, physically interposes himself between Patton and Bennett. Patton holsters his pistol and leaves, ordering that Bennett be returned to his unit immediately. Medical staff stand in shocked silence. The medical facts that emerge later make Patton's actions even more inexcusable. Private Cool was diagnosed with chronic dysentery, malaria with a fever of 104 degrees, and exhaustion after weeks of continuous combat. Private Bennett had a fever of 102 degrees from malaria, was suffering from severe dehydration, and had witnessed multiple close friends killed by artillery fire. Both men were legitimately ill. Both were experiencing what World War I called shell shock, and what later generations will call post-traumatic stress disorder. Neither was a coward in any meaningful sense. Patton, who prided himself on understanding soldiers, who had personally experienced wounds in 2 wars, completely failed to recognize genuine medical trauma. His anachronistic views about courage and cowardice, views formed in an earlier era, led him to brutalize sick men in front of medical staff trained to treat them. War correspondents witness or hear about both incidents within days. They face an agonizing decision. The slapping of sick soldiers is a major scandal that would dominate headlines. But reporting it during active operations might undermine American morale and help German propaganda. The correspondents approach Eisenhower's headquarters, present the facts, and ask what should be done. Eisenhower, facing the worst crisis of his command, makes a calculated decision. He will handle this militarily, not publicly. On August 17th, he sends Patton a scorching letter of reprimand. "I am well aware of the necessity for hardness and toughness on the battlefield, but this does not excuse brutality, abuse of the sick, nor exhibition of uncontrollable temper in front of subordinates." Eisenhower orders Patton to apologize personally to both privates, to the medical staff who witnessed the incidents, and to every division in 7th Army. Patton, in exchange, will keep his command. The correspondence in exchange will hold the story. Montgomery learns of the incidents through British intelligence channels and the informal officer network that spans Allied headquarters. His private response, recorded in letters to Field Marshal Alan Brooke and in his personal diary, reveals calculated satisfaction. Montgomery writes that Patton has self-destructed, and that while this is unfortunate, it may be necessary for proper command relationships. He makes no public statement defending Patton. He offers no private sympathy. Instead, he notes that Patton's loss of credibility will strengthen Montgomery's own position in the future strategic debates. This cold assessment reveals something essential about Montgomery. He sees military careers as zero-sum competitions. Patton's failure is Montgomery's opportunity. There is no brotherhood of arms, no martial solidarity, only advancement through others' mistakes. Patton spends September and October fulfilling Eisenhower's requirements, delivering humiliating apologies to tens of thousands of soldiers. He stands before assembled divisions and admits his actions were wrong. Some soldiers boo. Others remain silent. A few applaud because they appreciate his willingness to apologize. The experience breaks something in Patton. He writes in his diary, "I am a goddamned fool." He visits both privates personally, apologizing in private before the required public apology. Cool accepts graciously. Bennett is less forgiving. Patton completes all required apologies by late October, assuming the matter is closed. It is not closed. The story is simply waiting for the right moment to detonate publicly. That moment arrives on November 23rd, when radio commentator Drew Pearson breaks the story on his national broadcast. Pearson describes the slapping incidents in vivid detail, calls Patton the Army's most tempestuous general, and notes that while Patton has been reprimanded, he has not been relieved. Public reaction is immediate and furious. Newspapers across America denounce Patton. Editorials demand his court-martial. Members of Congress receive over 1,500 letters calling for Patton's dismissal. The War Department is flooded with angry mail. Secretary of War Henry Stimson and General Marshall both consider firing Patton to calm public outrage. Eisenhower sends a cable defending Patton's military ability, while acknowledging his impulsive behavior. The question becomes whether America can afford to lose one of its most effective combat commanders because he struck 2 sick soldiers. Montgomery maintains public silence throughout the American political firestorm, but his private letters reveal his assessment. He writes to Brooke that Patton's judgment must be questioned and that emotional instability may be a disqualifying factor for high command. He notes with apparent satisfaction that 7th Army will likely receive a new commander for the coming invasion of Italy, creating opportunities for British operational control. He makes these observations not with malice, but with the cold calculation of someone keeping score. Patton is a competitor. Competitors who eliminate themselves make Montgomery's path easier. The fact that Patton is suffering public humiliation, while Montgomery's reputation remains untarnished, is simply the way competitive military systems work. By December, the immediate crisis passes because George Marshall makes a practical calculation. Firing Patton would please public opinion, but weaken military effectiveness. America has few generals with Patton's demonstrated ability to lead mobile operations and inspire aggressive tactics. Marshall sends Patton to England with no immediate combat assignment, essentially a 9-month exile. Patton will command the fictitious 1st United States Army Group as part of Operation Fortitude, the deception plan making Germans believe invasion will come at Pas-de-Calais rather than Normandy. It is a paper army, a phantom command, perfectly designed to humiliate an aggressive commander desperate for combat. Patton accepts because he has no choice. He writes in his diary, "My destiny is to be last again. I shall live it down and continue on." The slapping scandal establishes a new dynamic in the Patton-Montgomery relationship. Before Sicily, they were simply competitors. After the scandal, Patton is damaged goods while Montgomery is untouchable. This imbalance affects every subsequent interaction. Patton knows he is on probation, knows one more mistake will end his career, knows Montgomery is aware of this vulnerability. Montgomery knows Patton is desperate to rehabilitate his reputation, knows this desperation may lead to risky operations, knows Allied command will favor the stable British general over the volatile American. The rivalry becomes asymmetric. Patton must prove he has learned control. Montgomery need only maintain his reputation for cautious competence. Both men are already thinking about the invasion of France, already maneuvering for position, already certain that the next campaign will vindicate their respective approaches. Neither imagines how badly their competition will complicate the liberation of Europe. January 1st, 1944. London. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery enters the conference room at Norfolk House to review plans for Operation Overlord, the invasion of France. He has been appointed to command 21st Army Group, which includes all British and Canadian forces plus operational control of American forces during the initial assault phase. This makes him, temporarily, the ground forces commander for the largest amphibious operation in military history. He examines the existing invasion plan, developed over months by Lieutenant General Frederick Morgan's staff. The plan calls for landing 3 divisions on a 25-mile front in Normandy. Montgomery reads the plan once, then declares it not good enough. The front is too narrow. 3 divisions are insufficient. The operation needs 5 divisions landing across 50 miles, requiring 1,000 additional landing craft and delaying the invasion from May to June. His staff explains that Churchill has already approved Morgan's plan. Montgomery is unmoved. The plan is wrong. Fix it. While Montgomery rewrites Overlord, Patton commands an army that does not exist. First United States Army Group exists on paper, in German intelligence reports, and in elaborate deception operations designed to convince Wehrmacht commanders that Patton will lead the primary invasion at Pas-de-Calais. The deception works because German intelligence respects Patton as America's best general and assumes he would not be relegated to secondary operations. Fictional divisions are created, fake radio traffic is generated, physical mock-ups of tanks and landing craft fill English ports visible to German reconnaissance aircraft. Patton travels conspicuously, giving the impression of active command preparation. In reality, he has no combat role. He watches actual invasion planning from outside, reading reports, understanding that younger generals are preparing the operation that should have been his. He writes in his diary on March 15th, "I am to be left out of this, the biggest fight in history. God damn it." Montgomery spends early 1944 drilling his assault forces with the same methodical intensity he brought to every previous command. Every battalion rehearses its landing. Every artillery piece is pre-registered for specific targets. Every tank company practices coordination with infantry. He fires officers who fail to meet standards. He simplifies command structures. He distributes clear written orders to every unit down to company level. His approach is the opposite of improvisation. He is eliminating uncertainty through overwhelming preparation. British and Canadian soldiers train on mock-up beaches that replicate Normandy conditions. They practice under live fire. They study aerial photographs until every hedge and building is familiar. Montgomery believes surprise is less valuable than readiness. When the invasion begins, his forces will know exactly what to do. On May 15th, Allied commanders gather at St. Paul's School in London for the final Overlord briefing. The room contains the men who will direct the liberation of Europe: Eisenhower, Montgomery, Churchill, King George VI, air commanders, naval commanders, corps and division leaders. Maps cover the walls showing every phase of the operation. Montgomery briefs the ground campaign. British and Canadian forces will land on the eastern beaches, Gold, Juno, Sword, and push inland to capture Caen, drawing German panzer reserves into attritional battles around that city. American forces will land on the western beaches, Omaha and Utah, and drive toward Cherbourg to capture a major port. The briefing is methodical, thorough, and slightly condescending in Montgomery's characteristic manner. He presents the plan as though its success is inevitable given proper execution. Patton is not invited to the briefing. He hears about it secondhand. The invasion succeeds on June 6th despite higher casualties than hoped and slower progress than planned. British forces land at Gold Beach with moderate resistance. Canadians at Juno face heavy fire but push inland. Americans at Omaha Beach encounter a catastrophe. Intense German fire men drowning under equipment weight, assault companies shattered before reaching the seawall. Only individual leadership and desperate courage salvaged the landing. By nightfall, 156,000 Allied soldiers are ashore, but the beachhead is shallower than planned. Montgomery establishes his headquarters near the beach and begins the grinding campaign to expand Allied territory. Patton, in England, learns about D-Day from radio broadcasts like any civilian. His humiliation is complete. The Normandy campaign's first month confirms Montgomery's strategic concept, but generates enormous controversy about his operational execution. British and Canadian forces attack toward Caen repeatedly and fail to capture it. German panzer divisions counterattack with intensity that surprises Allied planners. The city becomes a charnel house. British tanks burn in Norman fields. Infantry advances stall against fortified villages. Casualties mount. By July 1st, Caen remains in German hands. American forces, facing lighter opposition in the west, advance toward Cherbourg and capture it on June 27th. British newspapers begin questioning why Americans are advancing, while Montgomery's forces remain stuck. Churchill visits Montgomery's headquarters and demands faster progress. Montgomery explains, with strained patience, that the plan is working. German armor is concentrating against British forces, which means American forces will face weaker opposition when they launch the planned breakout in late July. This is Montgomery's actual strategy, though he explains it poorly and sometimes seems not to fully understand his own success. By pinning 7 German panzer divisions around Caen, he is enabling American breakthrough operations to the west. But Montgomery cannot admit that British forces are bait in an attritional battle because that would sound like defeatism. So he claims Caen will fall soon, then fails to take it, then claims he never intended to take it quickly, then launches operations that fail to take it. The contradictions make him appear either incompetent or dishonest. In reality, he is achieving his strategic objective, fixing German armor in place, while failing his operational objective, capturing Caen. The distinction is lost in press coverage that simply reports British forces stuck while Americans advance. Patton finally enters the war on July 28th when Third Army is officially activated in Normandy. He has spent 2 months watching from England while Bradley's First Army fought through the hedgerows. Now he has operational command of an entire army, and his approach differs completely from Montgomery's attritional warfare around Caen. Third Army is built for exploitation warfare, rapid advances, bypassing resistance, maintaining momentum regardless of risks. Patton immediately begins planning operations that will vindicate everything he has argued his entire career. He will break out of Normandy, race across France, reach Germany before winter, and prove that aggressive mobile warfare defeats methodical set-piece battles. Montgomery, 30 miles east, watches American preparations with barely concealed skepticism. The American approach appears reckless, unsustainable, likely to outrun logistics and create opportunities for German counterattack. Montgomery believes he understands warfare better than these Americans who treat combat like a cavalry charge. By early August, both men are positioned for the campaign that will define their rivalry's second act. Montgomery has successfully pinned German armor around Caen, creating conditions for American breakout, but failing to capture the city and thus appearing unsuccessful. Patton has Third Army ready to exploit the weakened German western flank, positioned to advance farther and faster than any Allied army to date. The question is not whether both approaches can succeed, they are complementary in theory, but whether both men can accept that they need each other's successes. Montgomery needs Patton to break out in the west, so the Caen battles mean something. Patton needs Montgomery to keep German armor fixed in the east, so Third Army faces weaker opposition. Neither general will acknowledge this interdependence. Instead, they will compete for resources, argue about strategy, and turn the liberation of France into a race where only one man can claim victory. The hedgerows of Normandy are about to give way to the open tank country of central France, and Patton is going to show what American armored warfare can achieve when properly led. July 25th, 1944, 09:38 hours, south of Saint-Lô, France. 1,500 heavy bombers approach a 7-square-kilometer rectangle of Norman farmland held by German forces. The targeting area has been carefully marked with colored panels visible from altitude. American forces have pulled back 1,200 yards from the bombardment zone. At 0940, the first bombs fall. For 90 minutes, 60,000 250-pound bombs and high-explosive munitions saturate the target area, the heaviest aerial bombardment in support of ground forces ever attempted. The noise is so intense that soldiers 3 miles away cannot hear each other shout. The ground shakes as though in an earthquake. Trees are uprooted. Buildings vaporize. German positions disappear under rolling explosions. Then the terrible error reveals itself. Some bombardments fall short. American soldiers who were supposed to be safe watch bombs falling on their positions. Lieutenant General Leslie McNair, the highest-ranking American ground officer, is killed when a bomb strikes his observation post. 111 Americans die from their own aircraft. But when the smoke clears and American infantry advances into the bombardment zone, they find German defenses shattered. Operation Cobra, the breakout from Normandy, has begun with tragic friendly fire losses and total destruction of German resistance. Within 24 hours, the operation achieves mobility that has not existed in this campaign since D-Day. American armored divisions pour through the gap blown by Cobra's bombardment. 4th Armored Division, leading 3rd Army's advance, covers 35 miles on August 1st alone. German forces, accustomed to weeks fighting for each hedgerow, cannot adjust to this sudden American speed. Patton's 3rd Army officially activates on August 1st, and within 72 hours it is 50 miles beyond the Normandy front lines, racing through Brittany toward the Atlantic ports, exploiting German confusion, bypassing resistance, maintaining momentum exactly as Patton has always advocated. His corps commanders receive simple orders. Advance until resistance is met. Bypass resistance when possible. Never stop moving. The contrast with Montgomery's attritional battles around Caen could not be starker. Montgomery, watching from his headquarters east of Caen, has mixed feelings about Cobra's success. On one hand, the American breakout validates his strategy of pinning German armor in the British sector. 7 panzer divisions remain around Caen, engaging British and Canadian forces, unable to reinforce against Patton's advance. Montgomery can legitimately claim his attritional battles enabled American exploitation. On the other hand, newspaper headlines celebrate Patton's dash while criticizing Montgomery's slowness. The narrative is forming. Methodical Montgomery ground forward while aggressive Patton achieved breakthrough. This narrative ignores that Montgomery faced stronger opposition. But narratives are not always accurate. They simply need to be compelling. Patton's race through Brittany is very compelling. On August 7th, the German response to Cobra reveals both Hitler's strategic incompetence and Montgomery's operational insight. Rather than retreating to defensible positions, Hitler orders a counterattack westward toward Avranches, attempting to cut off Patton's advance and restore the Normandy front. Operation Lüttich commits 4 panzer divisions to this offensive, weakening German forces elsewhere. Ultra-intelligence intercepts reveal the attack plans. Montgomery, coordinating Allied responses, recognizes the German counterattack as an opportunity rather than a threat. If German armor concentrates for the Mortagne attack, Allied forces can encircle them. He orders American forces to hold at Mortagne, while British and Canadian forces push south from Caen. Patton's 3rd Army will swing north from its Brittany advance. The movements, if executed properly, will trap the entire German 7th Army in a pocket near Falaise. The Mortagne counterattack begins early on August 7th and fails spectacularly. American forces, warned by intelligence, are prepared. Artillery and air power devastate German columns. The attack stalls after advancing only 2 miles. Now, the encirclement begins forming. British and Canadian forces launch Operation Totalize on August 8th, pushing south toward Falaise. Progress is slower than hoped. German defenses remain formidable, but the advance continues. Patton's 3rd Army pivots northeast, racing toward Argentan to close the southern jaw of the trap. By August 12th, the Falaise pocket is forming. German forces are compressed into shrinking territory under constant aerial attack. suffering catastrophic losses. The opportunity exists to destroy Germany's forces in Normandy entirely. Then comes the decision that will fuel decades of historical controversy. On August 13th, Patton's lead elements reach Argenton, 15 miles south of Falaise, where Canadian forces are advancing from the north. Patton wants to continue north, closing the gap immediately, trapping every German soldier in the pocket. He contacts Bradley, commanding 12th Army Group, and requests permission to advance to Falaise. Bradley, after consulting with Montgomery, orders Patton to halt at Argenton. The official explanation is that further American advance risks collision with Canadian forces approaching from north. The gap between Argenton and Falaise remains open. German forces begin escaping eastward through the narrow opening. Patton is incandescent with rage. He believes, and will believe for the rest of his life, that Bradley and Montgomery stopped him from closing the gap, because Montgomery wanted British and Canadian forces to have the glory of sealing the pocket. Patton's exact words to Bradley, later recorded by staff officers who heard the conversation, are, "Let me go on to Falaise and we'll drive the British back into the sea for another Dunkirk." Bradley refuses. Patton obeys but writes in his diary that evening, "We could have destroyed the German army in France. Politics and timidity prevented it." The gap finally closes on August 21st, but by then, 20,000 to 50,000 German soldiers have escaped. The Falaise pocket victory is substantial. 50,000 Germans captured, 10,000 killed, hundreds of tanks destroyed. But it is not the complete annihilation it could have been. Montgomery's role in the Falaise Gap controversy is complex. His supporters argue he coordinated a successful encirclement that destroyed most German forces in Normandy. His critics argue he moved too slowly from the north, allowing Germans to escape, and stopped Patton's faster advance for reasons of national pride. The truth is probably that Montgomery underestimated how quickly Patton would reach Argenton, and feared American and Canadian forces would engage each other in confusion if they met in mobile combat. But Montgomery's poor communication, he never explains his reasoning clearly, allows Patton and American historians to conclude the worst. The gap remains a symbol, Patton wanting to close it aggressively, Montgomery stopping him cautiously, Germans escaping between them. The statistical comparison from Normandy tells contradictory stories, depending on which metrics matter. From D-Day through August, British and Canadian forces faced 7 of 9 panzer divisions in Normandy, engaged in attritional battles that pinned German armor, suffered 49,000 casualties, and advanced 30 miles to liberate Caen. American forces faced 2 panzer divisions plus infantry formations, conducted mobile exploitation warfare after Cobra breakthrough, suffered 73,000 casualties, and advanced over 100 miles to reach Brittany and close Falaise pocket. Who contributed more to victory? The forces that fixed German strength or the forces that exploited German weakness? Both were necessary. Neither general will admit this. Press coverage crystallizes the competing narratives. Time magazine features Patton on its August cover with the headline, "Patton, Dashing Tank Commander." The article emphasizes Third Army's rapid advances, colorful leadership, aggressive tactics. British newspapers run articles titled "Caen, the Battle That Enabled Breakout," emphasizing Montgomery's strategic role. Neither narrative is wrong. Both are incomplete. Patton did achieve remarkable mobility once Cobra created the breakout opportunity. Montgomery did pin German armor, enabling that breakout. But accuracy matters less than perception. And the perception forming is that Patton won Normandy while Montgomery made excuses for slowness. By late August, as Allied armies pursue retreating Germans toward Paris and the Seine River, the competitive dynamic between Montgomery and Patton has intensified from professional rivalry to something approaching personal animosity. Patton believes Montgomery is cautious to the point of timidity, willing to sacrifice operational opportunities for personal safety. Montgomery believes Patton is reckless to the point of irresponsibility, willing to risk military disaster for headlines. Both men are partly right about each other. Both are completely blind to their own weaknesses. They are about to enter the race across France where logistics limitations will force Eisenhower to choose which army gets priority for supplies. That choice will determine not just who advances fastest, but whose approach to warfare receives validation. Neither man is prepared to accept second place. August 20th, 1944. The Seine River, France. Third Army forces reach the Seine River at 5 crossing points simultaneously, finding bridges demolished, but German resistance collapsing. Patton's engineers begin erecting temporary bridges while assault boats ferry infantry across. By nightfall, American forces have established bridgeheads on the northern bank. 60 miles to the north, Montgomery's 21st Army Group is still clearing German forces from the Falaise pocket and preparing its own Seine crossings. The race is intensifying. Patton is ahead geographically, but Montgomery is about to make a strategic gamble that will define the campaign's next phase. On August 23rd, at his headquarters in Normandy, Montgomery sits down to write the most controversial proposal of his career. He will argue for giving his army group all available supplies, all transportation priority, all logistical support. He will propose that Allied forces abandon Eisenhower's broad front strategy in favor of a single concentrated thrust through Netherlands and northern Germany directly to Berlin. He will argue that the war can end by Christmas 1944 if his plan is adopted. He is about to trigger the biggest strategic argument of the Western European campaign. The logistical reality facing Allied forces in late August is brutal. Armies have advanced 300 miles beyond Normandy, but supplies still land at Normandy beaches and the damaged port of Cherbourg. Every gallon of fuel, every artillery shell, every ration must be trucked forward along routes constantly lengthening as armies advance. The Red Ball Express, a truck convoy system, operates 5,958 vehicles 24 hours daily, but even this is insufficient. Third Army requests 400,000 gallons of fuel daily and receives 32,000. First Army needs 200,000 gallons daily and receives 100,000. 21st Army Group's requirements compete with American needs for limited supply capacity. Every commander wants more. There is never more. Mathematics imposes a cruel choice. Someone advances while someone else waits. Montgomery presents his single thrust proposal to Eisenhower on August 23rd. The argument is superficially logical. Concentrate all Allied combat power into 40 divisions, advancing on a narrow front through Belgium and Netherlands toward the Ruhr industrial region and Berlin. Assign all available supplies to this thrust. Halt other armies to conserve fuel. Montgomery argues that 2 advancing armies, splitting limited supplies, are weaker than 1 fully supplied army. His metaphor, 2 pencils advancing side by side are weaker than a single pencil. He proposes that his 21st Army Group, reinforced with American divisions, conduct this thrust while Patton's Third Army halts. The political implications are obvious. Montgomery wants operational command of the decisive campaign ending the war, relegating American forces to secondary roles. Eisenhower rejects Montgomery's proposal immediately but diplomatically. He argues for maintaining the broad front strategy. All army groups advance simultaneously, stretching German defenses, preventing concentrated German counterattacks. Eisenhower's approach minimizes risk but sacrifices speed. It represents American military philosophy, emphasizing material superiority over operational brilliance. Montgomery argues this is timid, that Germany is on the verge of collapse, that bold action now prevents winter campaigns. Eisenhower remains unconvinced, but he does make a concession. He will give Montgomery supply priority for Operation Market Garden, an ambitious airborne assault intended to cross the Rhine in Netherlands. This priority means Patton's Third Army receives reduced supplies. Patton learns of this decision and explodes. The fuel crisis hits Third Army on September 1st. Tank columns advancing toward the German border run dry. 4th Armored Division, which has led Third Army's advance for weeks, halts 50 miles from the Siegfried Line. Patton orders his supply officers to borrow fuel from depots assigned to First Army. This is essentially theft, but Patton justifies it as operational necessity. He writes in his diary, "My men can eat their belts, but my tanks gotta have gas." The fuel situation becomes so desperate that Patton's staff begins rationing by mission priority. Reconnaissance gets fuel, exploitation operations do not. By September 3rd, Third Army is effectively stationary despite being closer to Germany than any other Allied army. Paris falls on August 25th, liberated by French forces supported by American units, in a moment of pure joy that momentarily overshadows strategic debates. Montgomery had argued against liberating Paris immediately, claiming it would consume supplies better used for military operations. Eisenhower overruled him for political reasons. De Gaulle needed to establish free French authority before communist resistance movements seized control. Patton diverts Leclerc's 2nd Armored Division to Paris against operational orders, recognizing political necessity. He enters the city ahead of official ceremonies, visits Napoleon's tomb, and writes in his diary about destiny and history. Montgomery remains at his headquarters, disdainful of what he considers theatrical gestures when military matters need attention. On September 2nd, Eisenhower meets with Montgomery at Laval to discuss future strategy. The meeting grows heated. Montgomery argues again for single thrust, claiming German forces are beaten and one concentrated push will end the war. Eisenhower insists on broad front advance, arguing it is strategically sound and politically necessary to keep both American and British forces advancing. Montgomery presses his case with unusual vehemence, at one point placing his hand on Eisenhower's knee to emphasize a point. Eisenhower, who dislikes being touched, says coldly, "Steady, Monty. You can't talk to me like that. I'm your boss." The exchange reveals the tension underlying Allied command. Montgomery, British, older, more experienced in European warfare, believes he should direct strategy. Eisenhower, American, commanding a predominantly American army group, insists on exercising his authority. The strategic argument crystallizes around a practical question. Who deserves priority, the proven cautious approach or the aggressive gamble? Montgomery has delivered results through methodical operations. His army group is positioned for an advance through Netherlands toward Ruhr, but his approach is slow and consumes enormous resources. Patton has demonstrated spectacular mobility, but also dangerous overextension. Third Army advanced 600 miles in August, captured tens of thousands of prisoners, and now sits immobile for lack of fuel. Both generals claim their approach can end the war quickly. Both demand priority. Eisenhower must choose, knowing that whatever he decides will be criticized. Eisenhower splits his decision. He gives Montgomery supply priority and approval for Market Garden, scheduled for mid-September. But he refuses to halt Patton entirely, allowing Third Army limited operations in Lorraine region. This compromise satisfies no one. Montgomery believes he has been given insufficient resources to guarantee Market Garden's success. Patton believes he has been robbed of victory that was within reach. Both generals are convinced Eisenhower lacks the strategic vision to win the war decisively. Neither considers that Eisenhower is managing political realities they ignore. America is providing 70% of Allied troops and 90% of supplies in Western Europe. An operational plan that relegates American forces to support roles is politically impossible, regardless of military merit. The race to the Rhine enters a new phase in early September. Montgomery preparing for his great gamble at Arnhem, while Patton fights limited battles in Lorraine with inadequate supplies. The question is no longer whose approach is superior, but whether either approach can succeed given logistical constraints. Montgomery's Market Garden will test whether an airborne assault can seize Rhine crossings before German defenses solidify. Patton's Lorraine campaign will test whether aggressive tactics overcome supply shortages. Both operations are about to reveal the limits of Allied logistics and the consequences of strategic compromises. The rivalry continues, but now both generals are fighting not just Germans and each other, but the fundamental problem that has defeated every continental invader since Napoleon. An army marches on its stomach, and Allied stomachs are still in Normandy while their spearheads approach Germany. September 10th, 1944. Montgomery's headquarters, Brussels. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery presents Operation Market Garden to his staff with absolute confidence. The plan is audacious by his standards, almost Patton-like in its ambition. 35,000 paratroopers will drop along a 64-mile corridor through Netherlands, seizing bridges over major rivers and canals. British XXX Corps, led by armored divisions, will advance along this corridor from the Belgium border to Arnhem on the Lower Rhine. The timeline is optimistic. Paratroopers secure bridges. Armor races north. Rhine is crossed within 48 hours. Success opens northern Germany to invasion. Outflanks the Siegfried Line. Threatens the Ruhr industrial region. Montgomery tells his staff this operation will end the war before Christmas. His certainty is remarkable given the plan's complexity and the tight timeline. But Montgomery has received supply priority for this operation. He has 3 airborne divisions, the largest airborne force ever assembled. He has XSXX Corps, a powerful armored formation. He has Eisenhower's approval. What could go wrong? Almost everything goes wrong, but the problems begin even before the operation launches. Intelligence reports indicate German armor near Arnhem, specifically the 9th and 10th SS Panzer Divisions refitting after Normandy. The Dutch resistance provides detailed reports of tank sightings, repair facilities, and substantial German presence. British intelligence officers bring these reports to Montgomery's headquarters. The reaction is dismissive. Montgomery's intelligence chief, Brigadier Edgar Williams, argues the reports are exaggerated, that the German units are understrength and equipped with obsolete vehicles. Montgomery accepts this assessment because it fits his operational timeline. Acknowledging significant German armor at Arnhem would require delaying or modifying the operation. Montgomery has committed to Market Garden publicly, received priority for resources, and cannot back down without losing face. So, he proceeds, discounting intelligence that contradicts his plan. Patton, 300 miles south, watches Market Garden preparations with contempt and envy. He is not consulted about the operation. Third Army is expected to remain largely inactive during Market Garden, conserving supplies for Montgomery's offensive. On September 15th, 4 days before Market Garden begins, Patton writes in his diary, "Monty's dashing plan is a monument to stupidity. He is trying to be me, and he doesn't have the instinct for it. This will fail." Patton's assessment proves more accurate than Montgomery's optimism, but Patton is in no position to influence Allied strategy. He commands an army that is starved of fuel, watching from the sidelines, while Montgomery attempts the kind of rapid exploitation operation that Patton has advocated his entire career. September 17th, 1300 hours. Operation Market Garden begins. The sky over Netherlands fills with transport aircraft and gliders. American 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions drop on the southern bridges. British 1st Airborne Division drops near Arnhem. Initial reports are positive. Landings are successful. Minimal casualties. Bridges at Eindhoven and Nijmegen are captured or under attack. XXXX Corps begins its advance from the Belgium border. Irish Guards leading the armored column. The plan appears to be working. Then German resistance stiffens. The road north is narrow, easily defended, flanked by soft ground that prevents maneuver. German forces recover from initial surprise and begin contesting every mile. XSXX Corps advances slower than planned. The 48-hour timeline for reaching Arnhem proves fantastical within the first day. At Arnhem, British 1st Airborne Division faces a catastrophe that intelligence failures made inevitable. The division drops 8 miles from the bridge, too far due to concerns about German anti-aircraft defenses. Lieutenant Colonel John Frost's 2nd Battalion reaches Arnhem Bridge and holds the northern end against increasing German pressure. But the rest of the division encounters the 9th and 10th SS Panzer Divisions that intelligence claimed were not combat effective. German armor counterattacks with intensity and coordination that British paratroopers, armed only with light anti-tank weapons, cannot defeat. The division is cut off from the bridge, surrounded in Oosterbeek, fighting for survival rather than holding objectives. Radio communications with XXX Corps fail repeatedly. The operation's southern elements succeed, while its northern spearhead is being destroyed. Montgomery's reaction to reports from Arnhem is to insist the plan is working, and XXX Corps must advance faster. This is Montgomery at his worst. Confronted with evidence that his plan is failing, he doubles down rather than adapting. He orders additional reinforcements dropped at Arnhem, sending the Polish 1st Independent Parachute Brigade into the meat grinder on September 21st. The Poles suffer catastrophic casualties landing in the middle of German positions. Montgomery maintains public optimism while his staff watches the operation disintegrate. XXX Corps does not reach Nijmegen until September 19th, 2 days behind schedule. They cross the bridge there only after American paratroopers conduct a desperate assault crossing. The advance to Arnhem continues but slows to a crawl. By September 25th, 9 days into an operation planned for 48 hours, Market Garden's failure is undeniable. British 1st Airborne Division has fought to destruction at Arnhem. Of 10,005 men who landed, only 2,163 escape across the Rhine in a nighttime evacuation. The division loses 1,485 killed, 6,414 captured or missing. XXSX Corps reaches the southern bank of the Rhine at Arnhem, but cannot cross. The bridge, held briefly by Frost's battalion, is in German hands. The operation achieves limited success in southern Netherlands, but fails completely at Arnhem. The Rhine remains uncrossed. The war will not end before Christmas. Montgomery's gamble has failed. The strategic consequences are enormous. Market Garden consumes the supply priority Montgomery demanded, achieving partial success at heavy cost. The operation validates critics who argued single-thrust strategy was too risky. It proves that German forces, though beaten in France, retain significant combat capability when defending prepared positions. Most damagingly for Montgomery, it demonstrates that his cautious reputation was earned. When he attempts aggressive operations outside his comfort zone, he fails spectacularly. The contrast with his criticism of Patton is lost on no one. Montgomery spent months calling for bold action, received resources for bold action, attempted bold action, and failed. Patton, forced to wait during Market Garden, begins planning his own operations in Lorraine with grim satisfaction. Montgomery's failure is Patton's opportunity. Montgomery's immediate response is to minimize Market Garden's failure and emphasize its partial success. He claims the operation was 90% successful because most bridges were captured. This is technically true but strategically meaningless. The goal was crossing the Rhine, which was not achieved. He blames insufficient supplies, slow XXX Corps advance, bad weather, and bad luck. He does not acknowledge intelligence failures or optimistic planning. His inability to admit error poisons relationships with American commanders who watch British forces fail while using supplies that could have gone to Third Army. Eisenhower, who approved Market Garden despite doubts, recognizes the political damage and quietly shifts strategic priority back toward broad front operations. Montgomery's moment of operational independence has ended in failure that will define how historians assess his generalship. Patton's reaction to Market Garden's failure is recorded in letters and diary entries that mix vindication with frustration. He writes to his wife Beatrice, "Monty tried to be dashing and it didn't work. Now, maybe they'll let me fight." He writes in his diary, "The trouble with Montgomery is he thinks war is a mathematical problem. It's not. It's human nature, and you have to understand psychology." These assessments contain insight. Market Garden failed partly because Montgomery planned it like a logistics exercise rather than anticipating German adaptation. But Patton's criticism also reveals his blindness to his own weaknesses. Market Garden failed due to over-optimism and inadequate supply lines, the same weaknesses that will plague Patton's operations in Lorraine. Both generals are capable of brilliant operations and catastrophic failures. Neither can see his own limitations clearly. By October, Allied strategy returns to the broad front advance Eisenhower always preferred. Montgomery retains command of 21st Army Group, but loses the special priority that enabled Market Garden. Patton's Third Army receives increased supply allocations and begins offensive operations in Lorraine. The brief period when Montgomery might have proven single-thrust strategy ends with Arnhem's wreckage and thousands of British paratroopers in German POW camps. The rivalry continues, but the terms have shifted. Montgomery is no longer the untarnished methodical general, while Patton is the reckless cowboy. Now, both have failed ambitious operations. Now, both must prove they can succeed with limited resources against resurgent German defenses. The race to the Rhine continues, but autumn weather and supply shortages guarantee it will be a slow, grinding race, where neither general achieves the spectacular success both crave. The war will not end in 1944. Both armies will fight through winter, and the greatest test of their rivalry is still ahead. September 27th, 1944. Metz, France. Third Army forces attack the fortified city of Metz, the most heavily defended position between Patton's spearhead and the German border. Metz has not fallen to direct assault since 451 AD, when Attila the Hun captured it. The city is surrounded by 45 interconnected forts, built by Germans after 1870. Strengthened by French between the wars, now defended by 12,000 German soldiers who understand that every day they hold Metz delays Allied advance into Germany proper. Patton's 20th Corps begins the assault with confidence born from 3 months of rapid victories across France. Within 72 hours, that confidence is shattered. American infantry attacks Fort Driant, one of the outer fortifications, and is thrown back with 50% casualties. German concrete withstands American artillery. German counterattacks emerge from underground tunnels that American intelligence never mapped. Third Army, which has advanced hundreds of miles in weeks, suddenly cannot advance 4 miles in 4 days. This is not the war Patton prepared for. His entire military philosophy assumes mobility, exploitation, maintaining momentum regardless of obstacles. Metz is an obstacle that cannot be bypassed. The city controls critical road and rail junctions needed for supply lines. It cannot be ignored. German forces in Metz threaten any advance that passes by. It cannot be taken quickly. Fortifications designed to withstand months of siege cannot be breached by aggressive tank assaults. For the first time since taking Third Army command, Patton faces a problem that his characteristic boldness cannot solve. He needs to fight the kind of methodical, attritional campaign he has spent his career criticizing Montgomery for conducting. The irony is bitter and inescapable. The weather turns catastrophic in October, compounding Patton's difficulties. Autumn rains transform Lorraine into a swamp. The Moselle River floods its banks, turning approach routes to Metz into mud traps, where vehicles sink to their axles. Infantry advance through knee-deep mud that exhausts soldiers before they reach German positions. Tank operations become impossible. The ground cannot support armor weight. Artillery pieces sink into mud and cannot be repositioned. Supply trucks struggle to reach forward units. Men develop trench foot, pneumonia, hypothermia. The American Army, equipped and trained for mobile warfare, must learn to fight in conditions resembling the Western Front of 1917. Patton writes in his diary on October 15th, "The weather is more enemy than the Germans. We are fighting mud as much as we are fighting men." The fortifications at Metz reveal how little American forces understand European-style fortress warfare. Each fort is a self-contained defensive system. 6-foot-thick concrete walls, underground barracks, magazines protected by 30 feet of earth and concrete, interlocking fields of fire, sally ports for counterattacks. American doctrine assumes that concentrated artillery fire reduces fortifications. At Metz, American artillery fires 3.5 million shells in 3 months, more than the entire American Expeditionary Force fired in World War I, and many forts remain operational. German defenders shelter underground during bombardments, then emerge to main defensive positions when American infantry attacks. The forts fall only when American engineers learn to use explosive charges placed directly against fortification walls, a technique requiring infantry to fight within yards of German positions. Patton's frustration becomes palpable in his interactions with subordinates and superiors. He demands faster progress from corps commanders who explain that progress is impossible in current conditions. He argues with Bradley that Third Army needs more supplies, more replacements, more artillery ammunition. Bradley explains that all Allied armies face the same constraints. Eisenhower visits Third Army headquarters in October and finds Patton uncharacteristically subdued. The general who 3 months earlier was racing across France at 40 miles per day now measures advances in hundreds of yards. Eisenhower privately notes that Patton seems to have learned humility, though whether this lesson will persist is unclear. Patton writes to his wife, I am learning that there are times when even I must be patient. I hate it. The casualties in Lorraine mount with horrifying steadiness. Third Army suffers 55,000 casualties between September and December, killed, wounded, missing, and non-battle injuries from weather and disease. This casualty rate exceeds anything Third Army experienced in the Breakout across France. Individual battalions lose half their strength and must be rebuilt with replacements who lack combat experience. The replacement system proves inadequate. Trained soldiers arrive in small groups, are thrust into veteran units, and become casualties before learning the basic survival skills. Patton visits field hospitals and sees the cost of attritional warfare in ways he never experienced during mobile operations. These are not men wounded during rapid advances where casualties are dispersed and momentum carries armies forward. These are men ground down by static warfare where every yard costs blood. Montgomery, fighting his own attritional battles in Netherlands, watches Patton's Lorraine campaign with carefully concealed satisfaction. British intelligence provides Montgomery with regular reports on Third Army's slow progress and high casualties. Montgomery writes to Field Marshal Brooke in October, "Patton is learning what I tried to teach him in Sicily, that aggressive tactics without proper preparation lead to unnecessary casualties. Lorraine is his education." This assessment contains some truth. Patton is indeed learning limits of aggressive tactics against prepared defenses, but it ignores that Montgomery's own operations are equally stalled. Canadian and British forces attempting to clear the Scheldt estuary and open Antwerp face attritional fighting as costly as anything in Lorraine. Both generals are stuck. Both are suffering. Neither admits that the problem is not their tactical approach, but the reality that autumn 1944 belongs to the defender. The assault on Fort Driant becomes symbolic of everything wrong with Third Army's Lorraine campaign. American forces attack the fort repeatedly in October, each assault costing casualties without achieving success. Infantry reaches the fort's outer walls only to be driven back by German counterattacks emerging from underground passages. Combat engineers place demolition charges that prove insufficient to breach 6-foot-thick concrete. Flamethrower teams advance across exposed ground and are cut down by machine gun fire. By late October, 20th Corps has suffered 4,000 casualties attempting to reduce this single fort. Patton, visiting the front, witnesses the repulse of another attack and makes a decision that would have been unthinkable in August. He orders operations against Fort Driant suspended. Third Army will bypass it, contain it, and reduce it later when conditions improve. This is Montgomery's approach, accepting positions that cannot be taken quickly. And Patton hates making the decision even as he recognizes its necessity. November brings renewed offensive operations, but the character of Third Army's warfare has fundamentally changed. Patton launches attacks only after extensive artillery preparation. He masses overwhelming combat power at breakthrough points rather than attempting wide-ranging exploitation. He coordinates with air support in ways he considered unnecessary during the Breakout. His operations begin to resemble Montgomery's methodical battles around Caen, though Patton would never acknowledge the similarity. On November 8th, Third Army renews the offensive toward the Saar River, with 12 divisions attacking on a 30-mile front. Progress is measured and costly. German resistance remains fierce, but the advance continues, grinding forward through mud and rain, taking ground at terrible cost, but taking it nonetheless. Metz finally falls on November 22nd, after 72 days of siege and assault. American forces enter a devastated city where civilians have hidden in cellars for weeks, while artillery reduced buildings to rubble. The German garrison surrenders in stages as individual forts become untenable. The victory is complete but Pyrrhic. Third Army has spent 2.5 months capturing one city, suffered thousands of casualties, and demonstrated that aggressive tactics are insufficient against prepared defenses in difficult terrain. Patton visits Metz the day after its fall, tours the forts that resisted his army so long, and writes in his diary, "This has been the most bitter fighting I have ever encountered. The men who took Metz are heroes everyone." This is Patton at his best, acknowledging his soldiers' sacrifices without diminishing what they cost. By mid-December, Third Army has reached the Siegfried Line after advancing 40 miles in 3 months. The contrast with August's 600-mile advance is stark and humiliating. American newspapers, which celebrated Patton's dash across France, now criticize his slow slog through Lorraine. Stars and Stripes runs articles questioning whether Patton has lost his aggressive edge. Some correspondents suggest that Third Army's supply shortages, while real, may not fully explain the slow progress. Patton, who courted press attention during successful operations, now avoids journalists. The lesson of Lorraine is clear. Aggressive leadership and bold tactics succeed in exploitation warfare against collapsing enemy, but fail against prepared defenses in difficult terrain with limited supplies. This is not a lesson Patton wants to learn, but Lorraine has taught it ruthlessly. The Lorraine campaign's true significance emerges only in retrospect. It demonstrates that both Montgomery's and Patton's approaches have merit depending on circumstances. Montgomery's methodical tactics succeed against prepared defenses, but sacrifice speed. Patton's aggressive tactics succeed in exploitation, but fail against fortifications. The ideal commander would understand when to apply which approach. Neither Montgomery nor Patton possesses this flexibility. Montgomery cannot exploit success quickly. Patton cannot reduce fortifications efficiently. Their rivalry has convinced both men that one approach is always superior, when reality proves that context determines effectiveness. Lorraine has educated Patton in ways he resents but cannot deny. The general who began September certain he could smash through any German defense has ended December, accepting that some defenses require patience to overcome. This is character development through suffering, and Patton has suffered enough to learn. Whether he will remember these lessons when circumstances change remains an open question that will be answered in a snow-covered forest in the Ardennes, December the 16th, 1944, 05:30 hours. The Ardennes Forest, Belgium. 3 German armies attack through morning fog along an 85-mile front in the Ardennes. 28 divisions, including elite SS Panzer formations, held in reserve since Normandy, smash into positions held by 4 understrength American divisions, resting in what Allied intelligence considered a quiet sector. The surprise is total. The violence is overwhelming. German artillery fires an hour-long barrage, then infantry advances behind armor, penetrating American lines in dozens of places simultaneously. Radio communications collapse. Command and control disintegrate. By midday, German forces have advanced up to 5 miles, captured thousands of American prisoners, and created panic in First Army headquarters. This is Germany's last major offensive in the West. Adolf Hitler's desperate gamble to split Allied armies, capture Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace. The Battle of the Bulge has begun, and it will become the defining moment of the Patton-Montgomery rivalry. Montgomery is in England when the offensive begins, having taken Christmas leave, confident that German forces lack capability for major operations. He returns to his headquarters in Belgium on December 20th to find the northern shoulder of the German penetration threatening to collapse. Eisenhower, managing a crisis that is spread across 3 army groups, makes a controversial decision. He temporarily transfers American 1st and 9th Armies from Bradley's 12th Army Group to Montgomery's operational control. The rationale is practical. German advance has cut communications between Bradley's headquarters and his northern armies, but the implications are political. Montgomery now commands more American troops than Bradley. British press celebrates this as recognition of Montgomery's superior generalship. American commanders are humiliated. Patton, learning of the change, writes in his diary, "Ike is giving Monty what he wanted all along, operational control. This is a mistake that will be corrected by our actions." December 19th, Verdun, France. Eisenhower convenes an emergency conference with senior commanders to coordinate Allied response. The room is tense. German advance has created a 50-mile deep penetration. American casualties are mounting. Critical road junctions at Bastogne and Saint-Vif are under siege. The mood is near panic until Patton enters. Eisenhower explains the situation and asks how quickly Third Army can attack north into the German flank. The room expects Patton to request days or weeks to reorient his army from its eastward offensive toward the Saar. Patton answers immediately. December 22nd, 3 divisions. The room falls silent. What Patton is proposing is impossible by conventional military planning. Pivot an entire army 90 degrees, disengage from current operations, march 90 miles in winter conditions, attack prepared German positions, all in 72 hours. Eisenhower asks if Patton is serious. Patton is completely serious. What happens next becomes legendary in American military history. Third Army executes the most rapid large-scale redeployment of World War II. Patton's staff has anticipated the crisis. He ordered preliminary planning on December 18th when first reports arrived of German offensive. Now, those plans activate. Third Corps, consisting of 4 divisions and supporting units, totaling 133,000 men and 11,000 vehicles, disengages from the Saar front and marches north through snow and ice on narrow roads clogged with refugees and retreating American units. The movement requires extraordinary traffic control, precise timing, and ruthless prioritization. Patton's staff works around the clock. Radio operators coordinate movements. Military police control intersections. Logistics officers establish fuel and ammunition points along the route. On December 22nd at 0400 hours, exactly when Patton promised, 4th Armored Division attacks north toward Bastogne. Montgomery's role in the northern sector contrasts sharply with Patton's southern offensive. Montgomery arrives at 1st Army headquarters on December 20th, examines the situation, and begins imposing order on chaos. He repositions American divisions to create coherent defensive lines. He brings British XXX Corps forward as a strategic reserve. He establishes clear command relationships and communication systems. His methodical approach stabilizes the northern shoulder, preventing German forces from exploiting early breakthroughs. Montgomery is doing what he does best, creating defensive depth, husbanding resources, refusing to be rushed into premature counterattacks. His approach is militarily sound but psychologically tone-deaf. American commanders appreciate his organizational skills but resent his condescending manner. Montgomery refers to the crisis as an American defeat that British professionalism must correct. This attitude, however accurate the assessment might be, poisons relationships. At Bastogne, surrounded by German forces since December 20th, the 101st Airborne Division and attached units hold a critical road junction that anchors the entire southern shoulder of the German penetration. German commanders send surrender ultimatums. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe responds with one word: nuts. The garrison holds through desperate fighting, dropping temperatures and dwindling supplies. Airdrops provide minimal resupply when weather permits. The defenders know Patton's Third Army is attacking north toward them, but distance and German resistance make relief uncertain. By December 24th, Christmas Eve, Bastogne has held for 4 days. German forces have failed to capture the town, but maintain encirclement. The question is whether relief will arrive before the garrison is overwhelmed. December 26th, 1645 hours. Lead tanks from 4th Armored Division's 37th Tank Battalion reach Bastogne's perimeter, breaking the siege. The relief column has fought nearly 50 miles through German positions in 4 days of brutal combat. The breakthrough is narrow. German forces still surround Bastogne on 3 sides, but it prevents the garrison's destruction and establishes a supply corridor. Patton visits Bastogne the next day, tours the devastated town, meets with McAuliffe, and tells reporters the 101st doesn't need rescuing. They just needed someone to open a path so they could continue killing Germans. The relief of Bastogne becomes one of World War II's iconic moments, celebrated in American military culture as an example of audacity and determination overcoming numerical odds. Montgomery's northern operations succeed less dramatically, but perhaps more importantly. By late December, British and American forces under his command have contained German advance and prevented breakthrough to Antwerp. Montgomery carefully positions armored reserves to counterattack any German penetration. He refuses to commit forces prematurely, waiting until German offensive exhausts itself. His approach is professionally competent and strategically sound. It is also invisible compared to Patton's dramatic relief of Bastogne. Press coverage focuses on American heroism at Bastogne and Third Army's rapid relief operation. Montgomery's stabilization of the Northern Front receives less attention. This disparity infuriates Montgomery, who believes his contribution is more significant than Patton's, but less photogenic. The crisis that nearly destroys the Allied coalition comes on January 7, 1945, when Montgomery holds a press conference to explain operations during the Bulge. His intent is to praise American soldiers while explaining British contributions. His execution is catastrophic. He describes the battle in terms suggesting British forces rescued defeated American armies. He uses phrases like, "I took certain steps," and "I employed the whole available power of the British group of armies," that imply personal command of the battle. He makes no mention of Third Army's relief of Bastogne or American soldiers' desperate stands across the Ardennes. American press reaction is immediate and furious. Newspapers accuse Montgomery of stealing credit for American sacrifices. Eisenhower receives cables from Washington demanding Montgomery's removal. Churchill, recognizing the political crisis, makes an emergency speech in the House of Commons praising American forces and minimizing British contributions. The speech salvages Anglo-American relations, but permanently damages Montgomery's reputation in American military circles. Patton's private reaction to Montgomery's press conference is recorded in letters and diary entries that mix vindication with genuine anger. He writes, "Montgomery is not only a coward militarily, but also morally. He cannot admit that American forces saved his northern sector by attacking south while we attacked north. He must take credit for everything." This assessment is harsh but contains truth. Montgomery's press conference reveals his inability to share credit, his need to be recognized as the decisive commander, his blindness to political implications of his words. The press conference confirms everything Patton believes about Montgomery, that the British general is more concerned with reputation than reality, more interested in glory than honest assessment. The Battle of the Bulge concludes in late January with complete Allied victory. German forces withdraw, having suffered 100,000 casualties, losing tanks and assault guns they cannot replace, expending fuel reserves Germany needs for defensive operations. American forces suffer 89,000 casualties, but demonstrate resilience that surprises German commanders who expected rapid collapse. The battle proves several things about the Patton-Montgomery rivalry. Both men's approaches are necessary in different parts of the same battle. Patton's aggressive relief operations succeed in the south. Montgomery's defensive stabilization succeeds in the north. Neither approach alone wins the battle. Combined, they achieve victory. But neither general can acknowledge this complementarity. Each believes his contribution was decisive. Each resents the other's recognition. The rivalry continues, intensified by crisis, heading toward its final act in the race to cross the Rhine River and drive into Germany itself. March 7, 1945, 1600 hours, Remagen, Germany. Lieutenant Karl Timmermann leads Company A, 27th Armored Infantry Battalion, across the Ludendorff Bridge over the Rhine River at Remagen, while German engineers frantically attempt to detonate demolition charges that should have destroyed the bridge minutes ago. American tanks provide covering fire. German defenders shoot back from the eastern bank. The bridge, badly damaged, sways under the weight of men and vehicles crossing. Then Timmermann reaches the eastern side. American forces are across the Rhine. The supposedly impregnable river barrier has been breached by a random encounter and the initiative of junior officers exploiting an opportunity. This is First Army's accomplishment, not Patton's Third Army. But the crossing at Remagen proves that the Rhine can be forced and that German defenses are crumbling. Patton, learning of the crossing within hours, is simultaneously impressed and enraged. Impressed that American forces seized the opportunity. Enraged that someone else crossed first. The strategic significance of Remagen is immediately obvious. The Rhine represents Germany's last major defensive barrier in the West. Allied intelligence predicted that forcing a Rhine crossing would require elaborate preparations, massive air support, and weeks of attritional fighting. Remagen proves these assumptions wrong. Yes, the Ludendorff Bridge is in First Army's sector, not Third Army's. Yes, Patton had nothing to do with the crossing. But Remagen demonstrates that Rhine crossings are possible with boldness and speed, rather than Montgomery's elaborate preparations. Patton orders his staff to identify crossing sites in Third Army's sector immediately. He will not be second to cross the Rhine. He will not let Montgomery's planned Operation Plunder at Wesel receive all the glory. Third Army will cross the Rhine before Montgomery's massive set-piece operation even begins. Montgomery, at his headquarters in Belgium, learns of Remagen with mixed feelings. The crossing is good news strategically. It proves German defenses are weakening, but it undermines his argument that Rhine crossings require the kind of elaborate preparation he has been conducting for weeks. Operation Plunder, scheduled for late March, involves 1,400 artillery pieces, saturation bombing, airborne drops, engineering preparations, and overwhelming force concentration. Montgomery has argued this preparation is necessary to guarantee success. Remagen suggests that smaller forces with better timing can achieve results without massive buildup. Montgomery dismisses Remagen as lucky accident rather than replicable success. He continues preparations for plunder, determined to execute the largest single river crossing operation in military history. March 22nd, 2200 hours. Nierstein and Oppenheim, Germany. Third Army's 5th Infantry Division begins crossing the Rhine in assault boats at 2 points 15 miles south of Mainz. The operation is classic Patton. Minimal preparation, maximum surprise, aggressive exploitation of weak German defenses. American engineers have scouted crossing sites but conducted no rehearsals. Artillery fires brief bombardment, then infantry launches across the river in darkness. German resistance is light. The defenders expected Allied crossings farther north, where Montgomery is preparing plunder. By midnight, 5,000 American soldiers are across the Rhine with only 28 casualties. By dawn on March 23rd, engineers are constructing pontoon bridges. Third Army is across the Rhine in force, and Patton has not told anyone outside Third Army that the operation was happening. Patton's next action reveals his psychology perfectly. On March 23rd, at 0300 hours, 9 hours before Montgomery's Operation Plunder begins, Patton calls Bradley on a secure line. His exact words are recorded in Bradley's memoir. "Brad, don't tell anyone, but I sneaked a division over the Rhine last night, but we're going to wait until after Monty's crossing to announce it." I don't want to steal his thunder. The statement is entirely disingenuous. Patton absolutely wants to steal Montgomery's thunder. Waiting to announce Third Army's crossing until after plunder begins makes the comparison explicit. Patton crossed the Rhine with minimal preparation and light casualties. Montgomery required weeks of preparation and massive resources for the same result. The public relations implications are devastating to Montgomery's reputation. Operation Plunder begins on March 23rd at 2100 hours with preparatory bombardment by 1,300 artillery pieces. For 3 hours, Allied guns fire 3,500 shells per minute across a 25-mile front. RAF Bomber Command drops 12,000 tons of bombs on German positions. At midnight, 1st Commando Brigade begins crossing the Rhine in assault boats. By dawn on March 24th, 61,000 British, American, and Canadian troops are across, supported by pontoon bridges being constructed by engineering units. At 1000 hours, Operation Varsity begins. 14,000 British and American paratroopers drop behind German lines in the largest single-day airborne operation in history. The operation is a masterpiece of coordinated planning, overwhelming German defenses through sheer weight of preparation. The contrast between Patton's crossing and Montgomery's is stark and immediately becomes fodder for press coverage. Third Army crossed the Rhine with one division using assault boats, suffered 28 first-day casualties, achieved the total surprise, and established bridgehead without airborne support. 21st Army Group crossed the Rhine with multiple corps, suffered 3,500 first-day casualties, executed meticulously planned operation, and required airborne drops to secure the bridgehead. Both operations succeed completely. but one appears bold and efficient while the other appears heavy-handed and costly. American newspapers celebrate Patton's crossing as example of superior American tactical doctrine. British newspapers defend Montgomery's crossing as militarily professional and strategically sound. Patton's personal actions on March 24th crystallize his entire personality. He visits the Oppenheim bridgehead, crosses to the eastern bank, tours forward positions, then walks to the edge of the Rhine and urinates in the river. An accompanying photographer captures the moment. Patton later tells staff officers, "I've been looking forward to this for a long time. The gesture is vulgar, theatrical, and perfect for a general who understands that military history remembers dramatic moments as much as tactical accomplishments." Patton is literally pissing on Hitler's Germany, demonstrating contempt for the enemy and joy at crossing the last Great Barrier to Allied victory. The photograph circulates through American units, boosting morale and cementing Patton's reputation as a warrior who leads from the front. Montgomery visits his crossing sites on March 24th as well, but his demeanor is entirely different. He tours units methodically, checks engineering progress, confirms that operations are proceeding according to plan. He poses for photographs with British soldiers, but creates no memorable moments. His crossing is professional, competent, and utterly lacking in Patton's theatrical flair. Later, Montgomery writes in his diary that plunder is one of the best planned operations I have ever conducted, and notes with satisfaction that casualties were lower than predicted. He makes no mention of Patton's crossing or the press comparisons. Either he genuinely does not understand the public relations disaster, or he refuses to acknowledge it. Eisenhower visits both crossing sites, understanding the political necessity of appearing even-handed. He visits Montgomery's headquarters on March 24th, observes paratroop drops, offers congratulations on plunder's success. He visits Patton's headquarters on March 25th, crosses at Oppenheim, tours the bridgehead, and praises Third Army's initiative. Eisenhower's visits follow protocol. He visits the planned operation first, then the opportunistic one. But press coverage emphasizes that Eisenhower spent more time at Patton's crossing, walked farther into Germany with Third Army, and seemed more relaxed with American troops than with Montgomery's staff. These details matter because they feed narratives about which General Eisenhower truly respects. By March 26th, all three Allied Army groups, Montgomery's 21st in the north, Bradley's 12th in the center, Devers' 6th in the south, have forces across the Rhine. The river barrier has been breached at multiple points. German defenses are collapsing. The question is no longer whether Allies will win, but how quickly victory can be achieved and what territories each army will occupy. The Rhine crossings represent the final competitive phase of the Patton-Montgomery rivalry. Both men have crossed successfully. Both have demonstrated their approaches work. But one crossing generates headlines and celebration, while the other generates acknowledgement and criticism. Patton has won the public relations battle even if Montgomery can claim military superiority. The two generals will never operate near each other again. Their armies will diverge geographically, pursuing different objectives in the final month of European war. The rivalry continues, but the direct competition is ending, replaced by separate campaigns that will define their final contributions to Allied victory. April 1st, 1945. Schaff Headquarters, Reims, France. Eisenhower issues the directive that will determine the final phase of war in Europe and end any hope of continued cooperation between Montgomery and Patton. 21st Army Group will advance northeast through northern Germany toward Hamburg and Denmark, cutting off German forces, liberating Netherlands, and securing the Baltic coast before Soviet forces arrive. 12th Army Group will advance east-southeast through central Germany toward Leipzig and Dresden, linking with Soviet forces advancing from the east. 6th Army Group will advance southeast through Bavaria toward Austria and Czechoslovakia. Berlin is explicitly assigned to Soviet forces per agreements reached at Yalta. Montgomery, who has lobbied for weeks to lead an Allied thrust to Berlin, is furious. Patton, who wanted to race to Berlin himself, is equally frustrated. But Eisenhower's decision is final. The war will end with 3 geographically separate campaigns, not a unified drive to the Nazi capital. The strategic rationale behind Eisenhower's decision makes sense even if both British and American generals hate it. Soviet forces are 100 miles from Berlin. Allied forces are 300 miles away. Racing to Berlin would cost tens of thousands of casualties for territory already assigned to Soviet occupation. The alliance with Stalin is fragile. Violating agreements about operational boundaries could fracture it. More importantly, German forces remain capable of fierce resistance in some areas while collapsing in others. Intelligence indicates Hitler is planning a national redoubt in the Bavarian Alps, where fanatical Nazis will continue fighting. This intelligence proves mostly false, but it influences planning. Eisenhower concludes that destroying German military capability matters more than capturing symbolic objectives. Montgomery and Patton both disagree, but lack authority to override his decision. Montgomery's final campaign becomes a race against Soviet forces for territory in northern Germany and Denmark. 21st Army Group advances rapidly toward Hamburg in early April, encountering German resistance that varies from fanatical to non-existent. Some Wehrmacht units fight skillfully to cover retreating forces. Others surrender en masse, more interested in avoiding Soviet captivity than resisting Western allies. Montgomery's methodical approach serves him well in this environment. His forces advance steadily, clear territories completely, establish civil administration, and ensure supply lines are secure. By mid-April, British forces are approaching Hamburg. Canadian forces are liberating Netherlands. The campaign lacks drama, but achieves its objectives efficiently. Montgomery is doing what he has always done best, reducing a complex military problem to the manageable components and executing each component competently. Patton's final campaign is everything Montgomery's is not: rapid, undisciplined, spectacular, and strategically questionable. Third Army drives southeast toward Czechoslovakia and Austria, at speeds approaching the France Breakout. 4th Armored Division covers 200 miles in 10 days. Infantry divisions advance 40 miles per day. Bypassing resistance, capturing towns faster than maps can be updated. German forces in Bavaria are demoralized and disorganized, more concerned with escaping Soviet advance from the east than resisting Americans from the west. Patton's forces capture 600,000 prisoners in April alone. The advance generates enormous press coverage and minimal strategic value. Patton is conquering territory that will mostly be assigned to Soviet occupation after the war. He is liberating people who will be behind the Iron Curtain within months. But he is achieving spectacular operational success, and that is what matters to him. April 11th, 1945. Buchenwald concentration camp, Germany. 3rd Army's 6th Armored Division liberates the camp, encountering horrors that exceed anything soldiers have witnessed in 3 years of combat. 21,000 survivors, many near death from starvation and disease, are found in conditions so horrific that battle-hardened soldiers vomit and weep. Patton visits Buchenwald the next day. He tours the camp, sees the crematorium, sees the human remains, and becomes physically ill. He orders the nearby German town of Weimar to provide civilians who will tour the camp and see what their government did. He orders extensive photographic and film documentation. He writes in his diary, "I have seen hell. I understand now what we are fighting." The liberation of concentration camps transforms the war's moral calculus for American soldiers who might have wondered whether fighting in Europe was worth American blood. Buchenwald and the other camps answer that question definitively. Montgomery's forces liberate concentration camps in northern Germany with similar horror and similar determination to document the atrocities. Bergen-Belsen, liberated by British forces on April 15th, contains 60,000 prisoners in conditions as appalling as Buchenwald. British medical teams struggle to save survivors, many of whom die from malnutrition and typhus despite treatment. Montgomery orders German civilians from nearby towns to assist with cleanup and burial of thousands of corpses. The camps reveal that Allied intelligence dramatically underestimated the Holocaust's scale. Soldiers who crossed the Rhine, thinking they were finishing a conventional war, discovered they were liberating the victims of industrialized genocide. The discovery affects both armies profoundly, validating the war's purpose in ways that strategic objectives never could. By late April, the geography of Allied advance reflects the Patton-Montgomery rivalry's final phase. 21st Army Group, advancing methodically through northern Germany, securing territory, establishing order. 3rd Army racing through southern Germany and Austria, capturing ground at spectacular speed, generating headlines. Neither general is satisfied with his assignment. Montgomery believes he should have led the drive to Berlin, that his methodical approach would have succeeded where Eisenhower's political caution prevents attempt. Patton believes he should have been given Berlin mission, that his speed would have reached the city before Soviets, that political considerations should not override military opportunities. That both generals are probably wrong. Berlin operation would have cost enormous casualties for no strategic gain, but their frustration is genuine and will color their post-war memoirs. May 2nd, 1945. Lübeck, Germany. Montgomery's forces reach the Baltic coast, accomplishing Eisenhower's assigned objective, preventing Soviet forces from occupying Denmark. The advance succeeds by fewer than 48 hours. Soviet forces reach the same area days later. Montgomery immediately begins negotiating surrender of German forces in northern Germany, Netherlands, and Denmark. His headquarters becomes the venue for German military delegations seeking terms. Montgomery is in his element. He has achieved his military objective, prevented Soviet expansion, and positioned himself as the man who accepts German surrender in his sector. He has not won the race to Berlin, but he has won the race to the Baltic. This is professional success, even if it lacks the drama Patton generates. 3rd Army's advance ends not because it reaches assigned objectives, but because it runs out of war to fight. By early May, Patton's forces are deep into Czechoslovakia and Austria, accepting German surrenders, liberating Allied POWs, and waiting for orders that never come. Patton wants to continue to Prague, to Vienna, to push as far east as possible before Soviet forces arrive. Eisenhower refuses. The agreements with Stalin specify boundaries that 3rd Army is approaching. Further advance risks military confrontation with Soviet forces, which Eisenhower will not permit. Patton obeys but writes furiously in his diary about opportunities lost, about Eisenhower's timidity, about the certainty that occupying more territory now will matter in post-war politics. His strategic assessment proves accurate. The Iron Curtain will descend exactly where Allied armies stop in May 1945, but his tactical recommendation is politically impossible. The final statistics of their campaigns reveal both generals' characters. 3rd Army, from August 1944 through May 1945, advanced from Normandy to Austria, covered nearly 1,000 miles, fought 281 days, captured 144,000 square miles of territory, took 958,000 prisoners, suffered 140,000 casualties. 21st Army Group, from June 1944 through May 1945, advanced from Normandy to Baltic coast, covered approximately 800 miles, fought 337 days, captured approximately 40,000 square miles, took 400,000 prisoners, suffered over 90,000 casualties. The numbers tell different stories depending on interpretation. Patton achieved greater mobility and territorial gains. Montgomery faced stronger opposition and suffered proportionally similar casualties per mile advanced. By May 8th, Victory in Europe Day, both generals have achieved what they set out to accomplish when they began this rivalry in Sicily 2 years earlier. They proved their approaches to warfare can succeed. They established reputations as among the war's finest commanders. They led their armies to total victory over Nazi Germany. But they have not resolved the question of whose approach is superior, whose contribution was more significant, whose reputation history will favor. Those questions will be fought in memoirs, in press coverage, in military academy classrooms, and in historiography for decades to come. The rivalry that began with competing over Sicilian roads will continue long after both men are dead, because the questions they represent, boldness versus caution, speed versus preparation, personality versus system, are eternal questions in military affairs. The war that united them in common cause has ended. The rivalry that defined their relationship has not. May 4th, 1945, Lüneburg Heath, Germany. A small group of German officers approaches a cluster of tents on an isolated heath in northern Germany, where Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery has established his headquarters. The Germans include Admiral Hans-Georg von Friedeburg, representing Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, Hitler's successor as German head of state. They have come to surrender all German forces in northern Germany, Netherlands, and Denmark to Montgomery's 21st Army Group. Montgomery meets them outside his tent, wearing his characteristic beret and casual manner that disguises ruthless calculation. He does not invite the Germans inside. He does not offer chairs. He makes them stand while he reads the terms of surrender. The Germans have no leverage, no ability to negotiate. They will surrender unconditionally, or their forces will be destroyed. Montgomery's staging of this moment is perfect. He stands victorious while representatives of the regime that conquered most of Europe stand as supplicants. Photographers capture the scene. Montgomery ensures the world sees that the British Army, under his command, has received Germany's surrender. 3 days later, on May 7th, the complete German surrender occurs at Eisenhower's headquarters in Reims, France. Representatives of all Allied powers attend: American, British, Soviet, French. General Alfred Jodl signs the instrument of surrender for Germany. Eisenhower is present but does not personally accept the surrender. He delegates that role to his chief of staff, General Walter Bedell Smith, maintaining the diplomatic fiction that this is a coordinated Allied victory rather than an American triumph. Montgomery attends representing British Commonwealth forces. Patton attends representing Third Army and American ground forces. The two generals are in the same room, celebrating the same victory, but they barely speak. Photographers capture them standing near each other, but their body language reveals distance. Neither man looks at the other. Neither offers congratulations. The war is won, but the rivalry continues. VE Day, May 8th, is celebrated across the Allied world with jubilation, relief, and exhaustion. In London, crowds fill Trafalgar Square and Piccadilly Circus. Churchill gives speeches. The King and Queen appear on the Buckingham Palace balcony. Montgomery is praised in newspapers as the general who saved Britain at El Alamein and led the liberation of Northwest Europe. In the United States, celebrations are more muted. The Pacific War continues, and American casualties in that theater are mounting. But newspapers celebrate Patton as the general who rescued Bastogne and raced across Germany. Both men receive adulation from their respective nations. Neither receives full recognition from the other's nation. British press minimizes Patton's contributions. American press acknowledges Montgomery's competence but emphasizes American generals' achievements. The victory is shared, but the credit is divided along national lines. Montgomery holds a press conference on May 8th at his headquarters. He speaks about 21st Army Group's campaign from Normandy to the Baltic, emphasizing the careful planning and methodical execution that characterize British operations. He praises British and Canadian soldiers for their endurance and professionalism. He acknowledges American contributions in generalities, but offers no specific praise for Third Army or Patton. When a reporter asks about the rivalry with Patton, Montgomery dismisses the question. General Patton and I worked toward the same goal. There was no rivalry, merely different operational styles suited to different circumstances. This answer is technically correct and emotionally false. The rivalry was real, consequential, and continuing even as Montgomery denies it. Patton makes no public statement on VE Day. He spends May 8th with Third Army troops in Bavaria, visiting units, congratulating soldiers, and privately brooding about what comes next. His diary entries from early May reveal a man uncertain of his post-war purpose. He has spent his entire life preparing for war. Now that war is ending, what remains? He is 60 years old, too old for new careers, too famous to fade into retirement. He wants command in the Pacific War. Imagine Patton leading amphibious assaults against Japanese-held islands. But George Marshall has already decided that Patton's talents are not suited to Pacific operations. Patton begins to understand that VE Day marks not just Germany's end, but possibly his own irrelevance. June 1st, 1945. Frankfurt, Germany. Allied commanders gather for a meeting ostensibly about occupation responsibilities and war crimes investigations. Montgomery and Patton attend, along with Eisenhower, Bradley, and various corps commanders. The meeting is cordial, professional, and completely devoid of warmth between Montgomery and Patton. They sit across a conference table from each other. They exchange minimal pleasantries. When discussions touch on operational matters, each general describes his own army's accomplishments without acknowledging the others. Eisenhower, mediating, makes several attempts to emphasize how well the armies work together. Neither Montgomery nor Patton contradicts him directly, but neither offers supporting examples. The meeting reveals that victory has not resolved their differences, has not created mutual respect, has not even generated the courtesy of acknowledging each other's achievements. Private letters and diary entries from both generals in May and June reveal their actual opinions, which they are too diplomatic to express publicly. Montgomery writes to Field Marshal Brooke, "Patton is a good tactical commander who understands exploitation warfare, but he lacks strategic vision, and his approach works only when facing weak opposition." His reputation exceeds his actual contribution. Patton writes in his diary, "Montgomery is competent but overcautious. He won battles by accumulating resources until victory was inevitable, not through superior generalship. Any general with his material advantage would have succeeded." Both assessments are harsh, partially accurate, and completely blind to their own weaknesses. The immediate post-war period reveals statistics that will fuel debates for decades. Third Army's final casualties: 136,000 killed, wounded, captured, and missing. 21st Army Group's final casualties: over 90,000 killed, wounded, captured, and missing. Territory liberated: Third Army approximately 140,000 square miles. 21st Army Group approximately 40,000 square miles. Prisoners captured: Third Army 958,000, 21st Army Group 400,000. These numbers can be interpreted multiple ways. Patton's supporters argue they prove American tactical superiority. Montgomery's supporters argue they reflect 21st Army Group facing stronger German opposition throughout the campaign. Both interpretations have merit. Neither is complete. The question of relative contribution will be argued by historians, military theorists, and national pride for the rest of the 20th century and beyond. Who contributed more to Allied victory? The general who pinned German forces at Caen, enabling the Normandy breakout, or the general who achieved that breakout? Who was more valuable? The commander who stabilized the northern Bulge sector, or the commander who relieved Bastogne? Who demonstrated superior generalship? The planner who crossed the Rhine with meticulous preparation and acceptable casualties, or the exploiter who crossed opportunistically with minimal casualties but also less strategic impact? These questions have no definitive answers because they depend on which values one prioritizes: speed versus security, boldness versus caution, innovation versus doctrine. What is clear by summer 1945 is that both men have secured their places in military history as among World War II's most significant commanders. Montgomery will be remembered for Alamein, for Normandy planning, for methodical professionalism that rebuilt British military confidence after years of defeats. Patton will be remembered for Third Army's race across France, for Bastogne relief, for aggressive leadership that inspired American forces and terrorized German defenders. These reputations are deserved, earned through years of combat command under extraordinary pressure. But the rivalry has prevented either man from fully appreciating the other's achievements, from understanding that they were more effective as complementary forces than either could have been alone. By late summer, both generals face the strange reality that their wartime rivalry is ending not in resolution, but in geographic separation. Montgomery is appointed Chief of Imperial General Staff, the professional head of the British Army, a position that recognizes his service but also removes him from operational command. Patton remains in Germany commanding occupation forces, but this is administrative work for which his talents are poorly suited. The war that gave their rivalry meaning is over. The peacetime challenges they face will reveal which of them adapts to changed circumstances and which remains trapped in wartime roles that no longer exist. The competition continues, but it is becoming historical rather than operational, fought in memoirs and reputations rather than on battlefields. Neither man yet understands that their greatest tests are not behind them, but immediately ahead. In the complex moral and political challenges of occupied Germany, where military skill matters less than political judgment and diplomatic sensitivity, qualities neither general possesses in abundance. September the 22nd, 1945. Bad Tolls, Bavaria. General George S. Patton sits before a group of war correspondents at Third Army headquarters, fielding questions about his administration of occupied Bavaria. The press conference is supposed to be routine, discuss denazification procedures, reconstruction progress, relationships with displaced persons. Then a reporter asks why Patton has retained Nazi party members in administrative positions, despite explicit Allied policy requiring their removal. Patton's answer destroys what remains of his career. The Nazi thing is just like a Democrat-Republican election fight. After the election is over, you still need people to do the work. The room freezes. The reporter asks Patton to clarify. Patton, realizing his mistake, but unable to walk it back without appearing weak, doubles down. More than half the German people were Nazis, and we'd be in a hell of a fix if we removed all of them from office. The press conference ends shortly afterward. The reporters rush to file stories. Within 24 hours, Patton's comments are international news. The context of Patton's statement reveals his complete misunderstanding of denazification's moral purpose. Allied policy, formulated at Potsdam in July, requires removal of Nazi party members from positions of authority. The policy recognizes that reconstruction needs German administrators, but draws a distinction between ordinary Germans and active Nazi party members. Patton, focused on making Bavarian administration function efficiently, has retained experienced administrators regardless of party affiliation. His rationale is purely practical. Trained bureaucrats are more effective than untrained replacements, regardless of political history. But Patton cannot distinguish between American party politics, where Democrats and Republicans are competing philosophies within democratic frameworks, and Nazism, which is genocidal ideology responsible for millions of deaths. The comparison is morally obtuse and politically catastrophic. Eisenhower, reading press reports of Patton's comments, faces a painful decision. Patton is a war hero, a friend, and an irreplaceable combat commander if war resumes. But Patton has publicly undermined Allied policy and suggested moral equivalence between American democracy and Nazi totalitarianism. Newspapers demand Patton's dismissal. Politicians question whether Patton is fit for occupation duties. Eisenhower calls Patton to headquarters on September 28th and relieves him of Third Army Command. Patton is reassigned to command 15th Army, a paper organization charged with writing reports on European campaigns. The reassignment is diplomatic humiliation disguised as alternative duty. Patton understands exactly what is happening. His active military career is over. He is being put on a shelf until he can retire quietly. Montgomery learns of Patton's relief while preparing to assume his new role as Chief of Imperial General Staff. His private reaction, recorded in letters to Field Marshal Brooke, mixes satisfaction with genuine bewilderment. Montgomery writes, "Patton has destroyed himself through lack of political judgment. He never understood that peace requires different skills than war." This was perhaps inevitable. There is no sympathy in Montgomery's assessment, no recognition that military commanders often struggle with occupation. Duties requiring diplomatic sensitivity foreign to combat leadership. Montgomery, who has always maintained rigid distinction between appropriate and inappropriate behavior, cannot understand how Patton failed to see that comparing Nazis to American political parties was unacceptable. To Montgomery, Patton's failure confirms what he has believed throughout their rivalry. Patton lacks the judgment necessary for high command. October through November 1945 find Patton in professional limbo. 15th Army headquarters in Bad Nauheim is a backwater where he reviews reports, supervises historians, and has no operational responsibilities. The general who commanded hundreds of thousands in combat now commands clerks compiling statistics. He writes to his wife Beatrice letters describing his frustration. "I am a soldier. I am trained for war. Peace has no use for me." He fills his days with hunting, visiting historical sites, and preparing for return to the United States, where he will testify before Congress about demobilization and likely retire. He is 60 years old, in declining health from years of stress and increasingly bitter about his treatment. His diary entries from November suggest a man who feels his purpose has been stripped away along with his command. December 9th, 1945. 11:45 a.m. near Mannheim, Germany. Patton's 1938 Cadillac Model 75 sedan, driven by Private First Class Horace Woodring with Patton in the back seat, approaches a railroad crossing on the highway towards Speyer. Patton is en route to a pheasant hunt, one of the few activities providing him pleasure in these final months. He is examining the landscape, not wearing a seatbelt. They are not yet standard equipment. An Army deuce-and-a-half truck driven by Technical Sergeant Robert Thompson turns left across the Cadillac's path at the intersection. Woodring cannot stop in time. The Cadillac strikes the truck at low speed, approximately 20 miles per hour. The impact is not severe. Woodring and the other passenger are unhurt. But Patton, sitting upright in the back seat examining terrain through the window, is thrown forward. His head strikes something. Metal partition, roof beam. The exact object is never determined. When the car stops, Patton is conscious but paralyzed from the neck down. His cervical vertebrae are fractured. His spinal cord is damaged. Patton is rushed to the 130th Station Hospital in Heidelberg, where doctors assess his injuries. Cervical spine, fracture at the third and fourth vertebrae. Complete paralysis below the neck. Ability to speak and breathe preserved but all motor function lost. The prognosis is uncertain. Some patients with similar injuries recover partial function. Others remain paralyzed. All require months of care before outcome becomes clear. Beatrice Patton flies from the United States, arriving December 11th. For 12 days, Patton remains conscious, able to speak with family and visitors, discussing mortality with the dark humor that has always characterized his personality. He tells Beatrice he has always expected to die in combat, never imagined dying in a traffic accident. He jokes with doctors about his condition. He discusses his faith, his belief in reincarnation, his certainty that he has lived previous lives as warriors. These conversations reveal Patton's strange spirituality, his conviction that his soul has fought in previous wars and will fight in future ones. Montgomery sends a formal message of sympathy when he learns of Patton's accident. The message is correct, professional, and emotionally distant. "I am deeply sorry to hear of your accident and hope for your full recovery." Montgomery later writes to Brooke that Patton's paralysis is a tragic end for a great battle captain, even if his peacetime judgment was flawed. This assessment captures Montgomery's relationship with Patton, acknowledgement of military ability, combined with continued criticism of judgment. Montgomery cannot extend full respect even to a rival on his deathbed. The letter confirms what observers have suspected throughout their rivalry. Montgomery views Patton as competent in limited areas but ultimately inferior in overall capability. December the 21st, 1945. George S. Patton Jr. dies at 1750 hours from pulmonary edema and congestive heart failure, complications of his paralysis. He is 60 years old. His body is embalmed and prepared for burial. Beatrice decides he should be buried in the American Military Cemetery in Luxembourg, among the soldiers he commanded, rather than returning his body to the United States. On December 24th, Christmas Eve, Patton is buried with full military honors. 6,000 soldiers attend the funeral. Eisenhower is there, openly weeping. Bradley is there, devastated. Montgomery sends a wreath, but does not attend. The distance from London is cited as reason, though critics note that Montgomery attended other events requiring similar travel during this period. Montgomery's eulogy, delivered in absentia and read at the service, is characteristic. General Patton was a great battle captain who understood exploitation warfare. His aggressive leadership inspired American forces and contributed significantly to Allied victory. his loss is felt throughout the military community. The statement is accurate but somehow inadequate. It acknowledges Patton's strengths without warmth, recognizes his contributions without admiration. Those who knew both men recognize the eulogy as quintessential Montgomery, technically correct, professionally appropriate, and emotionally hollow, even in death. Patton cannot receive unqualified praise from his rival. The circumstances of Patton's death fuel conspiracy theories that persist for decades. The accident was low speed. Why was Patton so severely injured when others were unhurt? Technical Sergeant Thompson's driving was questionable. Was he negligent or deliberately causing the collision? Some conspiracy theorists, particularly in later decades, suggest Patton was assassinated because his anti-Soviet statements and criticism of occupation policy made him politically inconvenient. These theories lack credible evidence. The accident was investigated thoroughly at the time. Patton's injuries, while severe, are consistent with the collision's circumstances. His death was tragic, but not suspicious. The conspiracy theories reveal more about Patton's mythology than about historical reality. He has become a figure whose dramatic life seems to require an equally dramatic death, so random tragedy is reinterpreted as assassination. What is clear is that Patton's death removes from history the possibility of his post-war memoirs, his perspective on the rivalry, his assessment of Montgomery and other Allied commanders. We have his diary entries, his letters, his operational reports, but we do not have the comprehensive memoir he would have written in retirement, the book that would have presented his version of events and shaped historical understanding. Montgomery, by contrast, lives another 3 decades, publishing multiple volumes of memoirs, shaping historiography through his own accounts, influencing military education through his writings. This asymmetry matters. One rival gets to write the definitive account, while the other's voice is silenced by accident and mortality. By January 1946, Montgomery is establishing himself as Britain's preeminent military figure, while Patton's funeral flowers are still fresh on his grave. The rivalry has ended in the most absolute way possible. One man is dead, the other is ascending to peacetime military leadership. But the questions they represent, which approach to warfare is superior, whose contribution was more significant, whose legacy deserves greater recognition, remain unresolved. Those questions will be fought in classrooms, in historiography, in military doctrine development for generations to come. Patton cannot participate in those debates. Montgomery can and will, aggressively shaping how their rivalry is remembered and assessed. The competition that began on Sicily's roads in 1943 has entered a new phase where only one competitor remains to tell the story. 1946, London. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery sits at his desk in the War Office, now Chief of the Imperial General Staff, writing his memoirs of the North African campaign. El Alamein to the River Sangro will be published later this year, the first of several volumes documenting his military career. The book is methodical, detailed, and carefully constructed to emphasize Montgomery's strategic brilliance while minimizing others' contributions. Patton's role in Sicily receives 2 paragraphs. The American contribution to Normandy is acknowledged, but presented as supporting Montgomery's strategic vision. The book establishes patterns that will characterize Montgomery's post-war writings: meticulous attention to his own operations, generous praise for British and Commonwealth forces, minimal credit to American commanders, and absolute certainty that his strategic assessments were correct, even when events suggested otherwise. Montgomery's memoirs face immediate criticism from American military historians and participants who recognize that his accounts omit crucial context. The Sicily campaign, as Montgomery describes it, is a British operation where American forces played supporting roles. The Normandy campaign is presented as Montgomery's strategic masterpiece, with Patton's Breakout mentioned as exploitation of opportunities Montgomery created. These interpretations are not entirely false. Montgomery did plan Normandy, did create conditions for American breakout, but they are incomplete in ways that distort historical understanding. American reviewers note these omissions, but Montgomery's version gains traction in British military education and historiography because it is first, detailed, and authoritative sounding. 1947 brings publication of Patton's posthumous memoir, War as I Knew It, edited by Beatrice Patton from his diaries and letters. The book is everything Montgomery's is not: profane, opinionated, brutally honest about mistakes, contemptuous of caution, and deeply critical of Allied strategy. Patton describes Montgomery as overcautious to the point of timidity, and argues that the broad front strategy prolonged the war by 6 months. He claims that his Third Army could have reached Berlin before Soviets if given Montgomery's resources. He describes Montgomery's press conference after the Bulge as moral cowardice, and suggests British generals generally lacked American aggressive spirit. The book is a sensation, confirming everything admirers love about Patton and everything critics deplore: his certainty, his aggression, his willingness to criticize superiors, his inability to acknowledge his own mistakes. The competing memoirs establish narratives that will dominate historical interpretation for decades. Montgomery's careful, methodical self-presentation versus Patton's aggressive, self-confident mythology. British professionalism versus American audacity. Preparation versus exploitation. Neither narrative is complete without the other, but they become competing stories rather than complementary perspectives. Military historians begin taking sides. British historians generally favor Montgomery's approach, while American historians celebrate Patton's achievements. The rivalry that began as operational competition becomes historiographical conflict, where evidence is selectively interpreted to support preferred conclusions. Chester Wilmot's The Struggle for Europe, published in 1952, becomes the standard British interpretation of the campaign. Wilmot argues that Montgomery's single-thrust strategy should have been adopted, that it would have ended the war faster, that Eisenhower's caution and political considerations prevented optimal military strategy. The book is extensively researched and persuasively argued. It becomes required reading at British military academies and shapes a generation of officers' understanding of the campaign. American historians dispute Wilmot's conclusions, arguing that single-thrust strategy was logistically impossible and politically unacceptable, but they lack a comprehensive counter-narrative. Montgomery's version dominates British understanding, while American understanding remains fragmented among multiple competing accounts. The 1960s bring re-evaluation driven by new sources and generational distance. Ladislas Farrago's Patton Ordeal and Triumph, published in 1963, rehabilitates Patton's reputation by emphasizing his operational brilliance while acknowledging his personal flaws. The book presents Patton as a complex figure: genius tactician, inspiring leader, psychologically troubled, politically naive. Farrago's biography becomes the basis for the 1970 film Patton, starring George C. Scott, which wins 7 Academy Awards and transforms Patton into American cultural icon. The film's portrait is nuanced, showing Patton's brilliance and his darkness, but popular memory simplifies it to pure heroism. Patton becomes the aggressive warrior America wishes it had during Vietnam, a contrast to political constraints and limited war doctrines. No comparable Montgomery film is ever made. British cinema produces war films about the Battle of Britain, the Desert War, Market Garden, but none centered on Montgomery as protagonist. This matters because popular culture shapes historical memory as much as academic historiography. Patton becomes familiar to millions who never study military history. Montgomery remains known primarily to specialists and British audiences. The asymmetry in popular recognition influences how the rivalry is remembered. Patton is the dashing hero. Montgomery is the cautious foil. Even though their actual relationship was more complex and their relative contributions more balanced than popular memory suggests. Military academy curricula reveal how institutions interpret the rivalry. The United States Military Academy at West Point teaches the campaign using Patton's operations as examples of exploitation warfare: rapid advance, maintaining momentum, aggressive leadership. British Staff College teaches using Montgomery's operations as examples of methodical planning: thorough preparation, overwhelming force concentration, acceptable risk. Both approaches are valid for different contexts. But cadets learn that their nation's approach is superior. American officers graduate believing boldness beats caution. British officers graduate believing preparation beats improvisation. Neither learns that situational factors determine which approach succeeds, that the best commanders understand when to apply which method. Academic historians begin producing more balanced assessments in the 1980s as archival sources become available and participants die, allowing less hagiographic analysis. Martin Blumensen's work on Patton and Nigel Hamilton's official biography of Montgomery both acknowledge their subjects' flaws while explaining their successes. Blumensen notes that Patton's aggressive tactics succeeded against weak opposition, but failed against prepared defenses in Lorraine. Hamilton argues that Montgomery's methodical approach was appropriate for British resource constraints, but created missed opportunities for exploitation. These balanced assessments influence academic understanding, but barely touch popular memory, which prefers clear heroes and villains to complex historical figures. Carlo d'Este's scholarship in the 1980s and 90s provides the most comprehensive analysis of the rivalry, drawing on British, American, and German sources to explain how both generals succeeded within their contexts. D'Este argues that Montgomery's Normandy strategy was brilliant, pinning German armor to enable American breakout. But his execution was clumsy and his public relations catastrophic. He argues that Patton's exploitation across France was spectacular, but operationally less significant than Montgomery's grinding battles around Caen. D'Este's balanced assessment represents the historiographical consensus among serious scholars. Both generals contributed essential capabilities. Both had significant flaws. Neither's approach was universally superior. But historiographical consensus has limited impact on public memory or military culture. By the 21st century, the popular understanding remains simple. Patton was aggressive and succeeded. Montgomery was cautious and slow. This narrative is incomplete and unfair to Montgomery, whose contributions enabled American successes that popular culture attributes solely to American generals. It is also unfair to Patton, reducing his complex generalship to simple aggression when his actual operations required sophisticated logistics, intelligence analysis, and coordination. The rivalry's legacy is a simplified story that obscures the actual history of how the Western Front campaign succeeded through complementary approaches that neither general could acknowledge because their egos demanded sole credit for victory. The most important question the historiographical debate fails to resolve is counterfactual. Could either general have won the campaign alone? If Patton had commanded all Allied forces, could his aggressive tactics have ended the war faster? If Montgomery had commanded all forces, would his methodical approach have succeeded with fewer casualties? These questions are unanswerable but reveal the rivalry's core. Both men believed their approach alone was sufficient, when reality demonstrated that Allied victory required both approaches. Patton needed Montgomery to fix German forces, so exploitation was possible. Montgomery needed Patton to exploit opportunities so attritional battles achieved strategic results. Their inability to acknowledge this interdependence is their greatest failure as commanders, more significant than any tactical mistake they made on battlefields. The rivalry's true legacy is the demonstration that even brilliant military minds can be blinded by ego to the fundamental reality that complex problems require diverse solutions. January 17, 1991, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. General Norman Schwarzkopf briefs Operation Desert Storm's ground campaign to coalition commanders. The plan combines elements that students of military history immediately recognize: a massive deception operation, convincing Iraqi forces the main attack will come from the sea and south, while the actual main effort comes from the west in a wide flanking maneuver. The deception is Montgomery style, meticulous, detailed, supported by overwhelming evidence of preparations in the wrong sector. The flanking maneuver is Patton style, rapid armor exploitation, maintaining momentum, cutting enemy lines of communication. Schwarzkopf has studied both generals, understands that their approaches are complementary, not contradictory, applies lessons from each to different phases of the operation. When asked by a reporter if he is emulating any particular World War II commander, Schwarzkopf responds, "I've studied them all. The good ones teach you what to do. The bad ones teach you what not to do. The great ones teach you that context determines which approach works." Desert Storm's execution validates Schwarzkopf's synthesis. Coalition forces fix Iraqi attention with elaborate deception, while armored forces execute a left hook through the desert, advancing over 200 miles in 100 hours, encircling Iraqi forces, forcing surrender with minimal coalition casualties. The operation combines Montgomery's careful preparation, weeks of air campaign degrading Iraqi capabilities before ground attack, with Patton's aggressive exploitation, armored columns advancing at maximum speed without pausing to consolidate gains. Military analysts immediately recognized the campaign as lesson in applying historical precedents intelligently rather than dogmatically. The debate is no longer Montgomery versus Patton, but when to apply Montgomery's methods and when to apply Patton's. 2003 brings Iraq War and renewed debate about their legacies. Planning for Operation Iraqi Freedom divides military leaders into camps recognizable from World War II debates. Some planners advocate for overwhelming force, deploy 500,000 troops, secure all territory systematically, minimize risks. This is Montgomery's approach translated to 21st century context. Other planners advocate for rapid advance, deploy 200,000 troops, race to Baghdad, maintain momentum, accept risks. This is Patton's approach with modern technology. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld chooses the aggressive approach. American forces reach Baghdad in 3 weeks, with spectacular operational success, but inadequate forces for subsequent occupation. The Iraq War becomes a lesson that Patton's approach works for conventional warfare, but fails for stability operations. Exactly the lesson Patton's own occupation of Bavaria taught in 1945. Modern military academies teach the rivalry as case study in leadership styles and operational approaches. West Point's course on World War II, European theater, includes entire week examining Montgomery and Patton, their backgrounds, their philosophies, their operations, their strengths and weaknesses. Cadets study El Alamein as example of methodical battle, where overwhelming force and thorough preparation overcome strong defenses. They study Third Army's breakout from Normandy as example of exploitation warfare, where speed and aggression achieve disproportionate results. The lesson is explicit. Both approaches are necessary. Context determines which succeeds. Skilled commanders understand when to apply which method. No cadet graduates believing that aggression always beats caution, or that preparation always beats speed. British Royal Military Academy. Sandhurst teaches similar curriculum from different emphasis. Montgomery's campaigns receive more detailed analysis because they represent professional military education's core principles: planning, preparation, logistics, coordination. Patton's operations are studied as cautionary tales about risks of overextension and importance of maintaining supply lines. The difference in emphasis reflects institutional culture. British military education emphasizes minimizing risk and accepting longer timelines. American military education emphasizes accepting risk and achieving rapid decision. Neither approach is wrong, but they produce officers with different default assumptions about acceptable risk levels and operational tempo. Declassified documents from the 1990s reveal aspects of the rivalry that participants obscured in public. Private letters show that Patton acknowledged Montgomery's competence more often than his diary suggests. A 1944 letter to Beatrice, not published until 1995, includes this passage. Montgomery knows his business. He is methodical and rarely makes mistakes. I think he is too cautious. But his approach succeeds in situations where mine would fail. I wish we could combine our strengths rather than competing. This admission, private and never intended for publication, reveals that Patton understood the complementary nature of their approaches better than his public statements suggested. Similarly, declassified British documents include private conversation from 1952, recorded by an aide, where Montgomery acknowledges Patton's abilities. Patton was the finest field commander in the United States Army. His tactical sense was superb, his leadership inspiring, His strategic vision was limited, and his political judgment was non-existent. But for exploitation warfare, he had no equal. This assessment, never published during Montgomery's lifetime, confirms what scholars suspected. The public rivalry masked private respect, at least from Montgomery's side. Both generals maintained the rivalry publicly because it served their post-war reputations, even as they privately acknowledged each other's strengths. Statistical analysis using modern military science provides objective assessment unclouded by national bias. Third Army's advance rates, casualty ratios, and operational tempo are measured against 21st Army Group's comparable metrics, controlling for quality of opposition and terrain difficulty. The analysis concludes that Patton's forces advanced faster when facing weak opposition and achieved better casualty ratios in mobile warfare. Montgomery's forces achieved better results against strong opposition and suffered fewer casualties in attritional battles. Neither approach demonstrated clear superiority across all conditions. Context determined effectiveness, exactly as modern military theory predicts. The analysis validates neither general's claim of universal superiority while vindicating both generals' approaches for specific situations. Leadership scholars study the rivalry as example of how personality shapes military effectiveness. Patton's narcissistic confidence inspired aggressive subordinates who emulated his style, creating organizational culture optimized for exploitation warfare. Montgomery's methodical perfectionism created organizations optimized for set-piece battles where thorough preparation determined outcomes. Neither leader could adapt his personality to different requirements, which limited their effectiveness in situations requiring different approaches. Modern leadership theory emphasizes adaptability that neither general possessed. The rivalry teaches that even brilliant leaders have limitations, that personality traits producing success in some contexts cause failure in others. Contemporary military commanders explicitly reference lessons from the rivalry when explaining their decisions. General David Petraeus, commanding forces in Iraq and Afghanistan, frequently cited the need to combine Patton-style operational audacity with Montgomery-style strategic patience. General Stanley McChrystal, commanding Special Operations Forces, described his approach as being Patton tactically and Montgomery strategically. These references indicate that the rivalry has transcended its historical context to become shorthand for fundamental tensions in military operations: when to be aggressive and when to be cautious, when to exploit opportunities and when to consolidate gains, when to accept risk and when to minimize it. The rivalry's most important legacy may be the demonstration that great military questions rarely have simple answers. Montgomery was right that careful preparation and overwhelming force minimize casualties and ensure success. Patton was right that aggressive exploitation and maintained momentum prevent enemy recovery and shorten wars. Both principles are valid. Both fail in certain circumstances. The commander who succeeds is not the one who always applies one principle, but the one who understands which principle applies to current circumstances. This is the lesson neither Montgomery nor Patton fully learned, and it is the lesson their rivalry teaches most powerfully. Ego and certainty are the enemies of adaptation, and adaptation is the key to consistent success. Modern historians' final assessment, after decades of research and access to complete archives, reaches balanced conclusions. Montgomery contributed essential capabilities to Allied victory. His planning enabled Normandy invasion. His defensive operations stabilized crises. His methodical approach minimized casualties in difficult situations. Patton contributed equally essential but different capabilities. His exploitation accelerated Allied advance. His aggressive leadership inspired American forces. His rapid operations prevented German recovery. Neither was the better general, because the question implies singular approach when victory required diverse approaches. Both were great commanders with complementary strengths and significant weaknesses. The rivalry endures in popular culture, military education, and historical debate because it represents eternal tensions in human endeavor: boldness versus caution, innovation versus doctrine, personality versus system, speed versus thoroughness. These tensions exist in business, politics, sports, and every competitive field. The Montgomery-Patton rivalry provides concrete historical example of how these tensions play out, how both approaches can succeed, how ego and competition can prevent recognition of complementary strengths. Their story is ultimately about human nature as much as military history, how brilliant individuals can achieve extraordinary results while remaining blind to their own limitations, how competition can drive excellence while preventing cooperation, how legacy depends as much on narrative as on actual achievement. The final question is whether they needed each other. Could Montgomery have succeeded without Patton's exploitation? Could Patton have succeeded without Montgomery's preparation? The answer is almost certainly no to both questions. Montgomery's attritional battles created opportunities that required aggressive exploitation. Patton's rapid advances required rear areas secured by methodical consolidation. Allied victory required both, even though both generals spent their lives arguing their approach alone was sufficient. This is the rivalry's ultimate irony. Two men who insisted they succeeded independently actually depended on each other's complementary capabilities, but their egos prevented them from ever acknowledging it. Their inability to see this interdependence was their greatest weakness and, paradoxically, what makes their story eternally relevant. It reminds us that even the most brilliant minds can be blinded by competitive ego to the fundamental truth that complex challenges require diverse solutions, and that claiming sole credit for shared success diminishes both the claimer and the achievement.